Hi everyone. Before we get into this audiobook, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and drop a like. It helps me out a lot as well as contributes a lot to the channel. Now, let's get into the story. I hope you enjoy. From the first moment her mother explained the arrangement, Elodie understood that her destiny was entwined with the Silver Mountain Pack in ways she had never expected. She grew up hearing tales about the formidable alpha of the pack, a figure named Morgan whose reputation whispered of strength, cunning, and a relentless drive to protect his territory. Stories of his prowess stretched beyond the rugged ridgelines that shielded their valley from sight. Traveling merchants spoke of him in reverent tones, praising his diplomatic skill in dealing with other packs. Yet for all those glowing commendations, Elodie had never once laid eyes on him. His presence was a rumor hovering along the edges of her life, a promise that one day she would be part of his household. It was both a source of pride and a silent burden. Elodie's home pack was smaller than Silver Mountain, scarcely more than a handful of families and a modest stretch of farmland nestled in a valley. For centuries, it had existed in a tenuous truce, with the larger packs occupying the mountains and forests on every side. Her ancestors had negotiated trades in goods, services, or marriage alliances to keep the peace, ensuring that their limited farmland and the few people tending it would remain safe. Elodie knew she was the latest in a long line of such peaceful negotiations, a promise bound in old treaties that stated, if the Silver Mountain Pack needed a mate or an alliance through blood, they could claim it from her. Bloodline. Those words lingered in her mind, making her feel both prized and powerless all at once. On the morning she finally received the official summons from Silver Mountain, her heart pounded like a war drum. It came in the form of a formal letter delivered by a courier at dawn, sealed with an intricate insignia of a howling wolf against a crescent moon. Her mother stepped into the kitchen with trembling hands, letter in hand, trying to mask the tension in her eyes. The older woman's voice was steady as she read it, though Elodie could see the dampness on her lashes as she forced a proud smile. The letter requested Elodie's presence at Morgan's court by the next moon cycle. She was expected to arrive with a small retinue from her family, who would witness the formal union between her and the Alpha. Her mother said quietly, "We have prepared for this. You know we must keep to the treaty." Elodie swallowed the knot in her throat and nodded. She wanted to be brave, show her parents that she could handle the future laid out for her. Deep within, however, she worried about how easily she had become a piece on a chessboard, arranged to serve the interests of a powerful alpha she had never met. In the weeks that followed, she readied herself for departure. She sorted through her modest garments, carefully selecting the best ones for such a momentous occasion. She said her goodbyes to friends who wished her happiness and success in her new home. Some teased her in whispers, saying that she would soon be living in luxury among the most fearsome wolves in the region, while others tried to comfort her, offering trinkets or tokens for good luck. Mixed in with these gestures of affection was a sense of caution. Everyone had heard rumors of how the Silver Mountain Pack handled outsiders. They were not known for cruelty, but they also took pride in their authority. And Morgan, apparently, was a strict alpha who did not tolerate disobedience. Whenever Elodie tried to ask for more details about Morgan, her friends would shrug or lower their voices, implying they knew little beyond the fact that he was strong and had led his pack to triumph in every dispute he encountered. "Perhaps he'll be kind," one friend murmured optimistically, but uncertainty shaded her gaze. Elodie clung to that possibility. Finally, the day came to leave her childhood home. The small retinue included her mother, her uncle, and 2 family friends who had served as loyal guardians. They traveled a full day on horseback, following winding roads through farmland, crossing shallow rivers, until the landscape began to shift into rocky foothills and dense pine forests. A faint chill caressed the air, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and moss. Elodie, wrapped in a cloak against the brisk breeze, gazed at the mountains rising before them, their slopes veiled in thick coniferous trees. She wondered what her new life would be like, uncertain if she should feel anticipation or dread. By dusk, they reached the perimeter of Silver Mountain territory. Her uncle raised an arm in a silent command for everyone to stop. A group of patrolling werewolves stood in human form at the side of the road, silver armbands marking them as official sentinels. Their leader, a tall female with her dark hair braided close to her scalp, greeted them courteously but firmly. She studied Elodie with an appraising, almost clinical look, as though searching for any sign of weakness. "Elodie from the valley," the sentinel stated, reading from a parchment. "You are expected in the main compound. Follow us." Their escort guided the group through the trees until they arrived at a series of large wooden buildings set against the foot of the mountain. The structures, built from thick logs and reinforced with stone foundations, formed a protective ring around a spacious courtyard. Lanterns, glowing softly, hung from high beams, illuminating the interior in warm, golden light. People milled about, some in human form, and others in their wolf forms trotting silently across well-worn pathways. The hum of conversation, the occasional bark or growl, gave the settlement an air of quiet, bustling activity. Elodie dismounted with a flutter of nerves twisting her stomach. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder in a supportive squeeze. Soon after, the sentinel who had greeted them instructed them to wait near the courtyard's center. "Morgan will see you shortly," she said, her tone curt and businesslike. Moments trickled past with excruciating slowness. Elodie tried to breathe evenly, to steady her racing heart. She glanced around, noticing people's curious stares. They had likely heard rumors of her arrival. Then, from within a large wooden hall at the end of the courtyard, a door swung open and a figure strode forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with commanding confidence. His hair was a burnished brown, worn trimmed around his ears, and his eyes gleamed a color akin to cold steel. A hush fell over the onlookers. This had to be Morgan, the alpha of the Silver Mountain Pack. Elodie's first impression was that he looked entirely certain of himself. This was no uncertain leader, but someone used to seeing others bow to his will. He surveyed her, expression unreadable. For a fraction of a second, she thought she glimpsed a flicker of disappointment in his eyes, but it vanished so swiftly that she could not be sure it was truly there. He exchanged a few words with the sentinel, then stepped closer. Elodie's mother took an instinctive step forward in a protective gesture, but the sentinel calmly signaled for her to remain at a respectful distance. Morgan halted a few steps before Elodie. "Welcome," he said. His voice was smooth, but there was no warmth in it. "I trust your journey was not too harsh." She lowered her gaze politely. "It was comfortable enough, thank you." She tried to keep her voice firm, yet her heart trembled in her chest. Morgan glanced at her mother, then at the rest of the retinue. "We have prepared quarters for you," he announced, turning his attention back to Elodie. "But I would speak with you privately first. My beta will show your family members to their rooms." Elodie looked past Morgan's shoulder, curious to see who this beta might be, only to notice a man with a tall, solid build standing in the shadows near the door. She couldn't quite make out his face in the lamplight, but she saw he was wearing a dark cloak, the hood partly obscuring his features. Morgan beckoned him forward, and when he stepped into the courtyard's glow, Elodie's gaze flickered across a prominent scar running from his right temple down his cheek. a ragged reminder of a wound that had clearly left a permanent mark. His black hair was cut short, and there was a faint streak of silver near his brow that stood out starkly in the lamplight. His expression was impassive, his mouth set in a line that suggested he had little to say. There was an air of intense stillness about him, as though he were forever standing guard. Morgan introduced him as Saurin, the beta of the Silver Mountain Pack. "He'll be your family's escort," Morgan told Elodie. "I want you to accompany me inside. We have matters to discuss." He turned sharply, indicating the door to the wooden hall. Unsure of what else to do, Elodie followed in his wake. She managed one quick glance over her shoulder at her mother, who gave her a slightly forced smile of encouragement, and then she lost sight of them all when the door closed behind her. Inside, the hall's main chamber was large, rustic, and well lit by multiple torches in brackets along the walls. The interior smelled of burning pine, old wood, and something floral that Elodie could not name. A long table sat in the center, likely used for strategy meetings or large gatherings, but for now it was unoccupied. Morgan walked to the far side of the chamber, near a hearth where bright flames crackled. When he turned to face her, a hard light glimmered in his eyes, one that suggested some unspoken frustration. "We've known of this arrangement for some time," Morgan said, crossing his arms over his chest. "The promise that your family made many generations ago. My father honored such treaties before me, which is why I'm expected to do the same." He paused, letting his words settle. "We have certain traditions for official mates, but we will arrange the rest of the ceremony in a week's time. I want to understand your place here and what you can bring to the pack." Elodie hesitated, unsure how to respond. No one had told her she would need to defend her worth to him on the first meeting. She cleared her throat. I was told that our bloodline was favored for certain alliances. My father's side has historically produced skilled healers. I'm not a fully trained healer," she admitted softly, "but I have some knowledge of medicinal herbs. I'm also proficient in reading and writing," she added, recalling that her mother once said knowledge could be a rare commodity in isolated packs. "I can help keep records, if needed." He studied her for a moment. "That could be useful," he said, though there was no real spark of enthusiasm. He turned aside, gazing into the fire. "You're aware that being my mate means serving the entire pack's needs. It's a role that demands strength. We are a large group, and we stand at a crossroads with our neighboring packs. I need to be certain you understand the sand. Responsibility." He did not speak like a man enthralled at the idea of a mate who had traveled across leagues of territory just to stand beside him. Instead, he sounded almost inconvenienced, as though she were a necessary tool more than a partner he looked forward to welcoming. Elodie swallowed her rising anxiety. "I understand." He nodded curtly, then moved away from the hearth. "I will show you to your room. One of the women from our inner circle will assist you with any immediate needs. We have pack matters to address, so I cannot linger. Tomorrow, you will meet with the others in my council, and we'll formalize the schedule for the ceremony. If you are uneasy, you can remain close to your family for now." She followed him out of the hall and down a hallway flanked by closed doors, all fashioned from the same thick wooden planks. Once they arrived at a small chamber near the end, Morgan opened the door, revealing a modest space with a bed, a table, and a single window overlooking the courtyard. The furnishings were simple but serviceable, and the bedding looked clean. Elodie's thoughts spun as she stepped inside, taking in the fact that this would be her new place of rest. Morgan paused at the threshold. For a split second, He seemed to struggle with something unspoken, some tension pulling at the corners of his mouth. Then he said evenly, "Rest. You've had a long trip. We will speak more tomorrow." Without another word, he left, shoving the door softly behind him. Elodie released a breath she had not realized she was holding. She had hoped for kindness, or at least a genuine smile. While not overtly rude, Morgan carried an air of detachment that set her on edge. She found herself remembering the beta's stoic face and the scar that ran down his cheek, feeling a quiver of unease. Everyone here seemed well-organized, disciplined, and perhaps formidable in ways that made her wonder how she would ever belong. A short while later, a woman named Thera knocked on her door and introduced herself as one of the Alpha's circle. Her role, she explained, involved coordinating daily routines for the pack, which included helping Elodie settle in. Thera was a wiry, red-haired individual with intelligent brown eyes. Her posture was confident, and she radiated the calm authority of someone who had served the pack for many years. "Come with me to get a meal," Thera offered. "We have a communal dining area in another building. Your mother and family are already waiting there. We keep our traditions communal, fosters unity." Elodie felt a surge of relief. She was eager to see her mother again, to anchor herself if only for a moment in something familiar. She followed Thera outside, bracing against the evening chill. The courtyard was more crowded now. Werewolves in human form lingered, chatting in low voices as they gathered around large, steaming pots set up near the dining hall. Some paused to watch Elodie pass, curious about the outsider promised to their alpha. She forced a small, polite smile, not wanting to appear unfriendly, but her heart was hammering as though expecting the slightest misstep to draw disapproval. Thera led Elodie through an open door into a well-lit room where tables spanned the length of the space. People huddled in clusters over steaming bowls of stew, chunks of bread, and various roasted vegetables. Laughter and conversation intermingled with the clatter of wooden utensils. Elodie spotted her mother and uncle seated at a table near the corner, talking quietly with two older men who wore the Silver Mountain insignia on their jackets. Relief washed through her when her mother beckoned her over and patted the seat beside her. Thera bowed out gracefully, saying she had other duties to attend, and departed. As Elodie slid onto the bench next to her mother, she noticed that one of the older men eyed her with calculated appraisal, but a friendly smile curled his lips. She guessed they were members of Morgan's counsel, or possibly elders of the pack. Her mother gave Elodie a look of encouragement. "We were just discussing the upcoming ceremony," she said, voice calm and measured. "They're quite pleased you arrived ahead of schedule." The older man with kind eyes nodded. "Galen," he introduced himself, extending a hand. She shook it, feeling the warmth of his grip. "I've known Morgan since he was a child. The pack is excited, though we are in precarious times, with negotiations going on between us and a neighboring clan. Your union with Morgan is a symbol of unity and strength." Elodie glanced between them, searching for signs that they disapproved of her or might cause trouble. She recalled Morgan's chilly reception, but forced herself to remain composed. "I hope I can meet everyone's expectations," she said. Galen's smile deepened. "We do not expect you to fix all problems overnight, but new alliances are always reason for hope. There has been friction with the Redwood Ka. Pack over territory boundaries. Some are uneasy about the arrangement with your family. They wonder how it will affect future diplomacy. Still, I think it is a wise step. Morgan is a capable leader, albeit a busy one, and you will play an important role." Her mother squeezed her hand. "It will be fine," she whispered. "We'll see the ceremony through, and you will find your footing." Elodie nodded, though a knot still tugged in her stomach. She ate in subdued silence, tasting the savory stew only faintly as her mind spun around the uncertainty of her situation. Her father, who had remained at home, had always insisted that forging peace with a powerful pack was essential for the valley's security. Now, being confronted with the flesh-and-blood reality of that arrangement, she felt as though she was teetering on the edge of a great unknown. After supper, she returned to her assigned room. Her mother walked with her, and they shared a quiet conversation in the hallway. "I can stay for a few days at least," her mother said, gently brushing a stray lock of Elodie's hair behind her ear. "But the final ceremony is in a week's time. After that, you will be bound to Morgan and this pack. I must return home, but you will visit often, I promise." Elodie forced a smile. "I'm grateful you could be here at all," she whispered. They embraced, and then her mother headed off to the guest quarters. Elodie waited until her footsteps receded before stepping into her own room. Inside, the room felt oddly cold. Or perhaps that was the chill in her own thoughts. She lit a small lamp on the table and sat on the bed, trying to piece together the puzzle of her new life. Morgan had hardly shown any personal interest. Was he simply busy, or was he displeased with the arrangement? The fleeting disappointment she had caught in his gaze, had it been directed at her? A spiral of self-doubt reeled through her mind. She wanted to believe there was more to his aloof behavior, perhaps a hidden layer she had not glimpsed yet. Fatigue finally tugged at her eyelids, so she prepared for sleep, changing into a simple nightdress and slipping beneath the covers. The bed was comfortable enough, though the unfamiliar sense of the pack's territory seeped through the window, reminding her she was far from home. As she drifted toward slumber, she promised herself that tomorrow she would observe closely, learn what she needed to do, and prove her worth. She was not helpless, nor was she merely a piece of a treaty. Whatever constraints tradition placed on her, she would find a way to carve out her own path. Morning dawned crisp and clear. Elodie woke to soft daylight filtering through the window, stretching shadows across the floor. She dressed in a plain but clean gown and ventured outside, determined to meet the day with resolve. The courtyard was bustling already. She spotted a group of sentinels gathering for what appeared to be a training session. They moved in unison, guided by barked commands, practicing hand-to-hand drills and forms that blended human martial techniques with the fluid grace of wolves. Even from a distance, the discipline was evident. She made her way through the compound, searching for any sign of Morgan or Thera, uncertain where to begin. Eventually, she found Thera exiting a storage building with an armload of supplies. The red-haired woman greeted her with an energetic nod. "Good morning, Elodie. Sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Elodie lied politely. "I would like to help, or at least find out more about pack life. Where should I start?" Thera smiled, an approving glint in her eyes. "That's the spirit. I'll give you a quick tour of the main areas. If you show genuine interest in the daily workings of the pack, you'll earn respect quickly." They started by walking through the storage area, where Thera explained how supplies were inventoried. Next, she introduced Elodie to two older women who oversaw the kitchen, both quick-witted individuals who wasted no time putting Elodie to work slicing vegetables for the midday meal. Elodie set to the task, eager to prove she was not above helping in the kitchen. She listened to the women's gossip about the Redwood Pack's rumored maneuvers, about some internal tensions in Silver Mountain over resource distribution, about the expansions Morgan planned for the territory's border. The mention of Redwood Pack made Elodie's ears perk up. She remembered how Galen said there was friction. Though she felt somewhat out of place among these seasoned werewolves, she tried to glean details about Morgan's strategies. The women were more than happy to share rumors, telling Elodie that Redwood's Alpha might be preparing a challenge to Silver Mountain's claim over certain hunting grounds. One of them, A sharp-eyed woman named Edda shrugged as she handed Elodie another turnip to slice. Morgan and Redwood's Alpha used to be on neutral terms. I'm not sure what changed, but tension has been building. If Redwood attempts a direct confrontation, it won't be just some quiet negotiation. Thera popped her head back in to beckon Elodie forward. Time to see more of the compound. You'll have plenty of opportunities to talk with them later. As they strolled outside, the crisp morning light revealed the full expanse of the courtyard and the buildings clustered around it. The main hall, where Elodie had met Morgan, stood at the compound's center. Near the eastern edge were stables for the pack's horses and a fenced training yard. On the western side, a narrow path led up the slope toward watchtowers perched among tall pine trees. Elodie marveled at the scale. This was not a haphazard settlement. It was a fortress that blended into the wilderness, each structure carefully placed for optimal defense and function. She was about to comment when a faint stir rippled through the courtyard. She turned and saw Morgan emerging from the main hall, flanked by 2 council members. His expression was focused, his stride purposeful. Instinctively, she straightened, wondering if he would address her. He did not stop. He merely offered a quick nod in her direction, then continued on with his companions. Once again, she sensed no warmth. Confusion knotted in her stomach, though she tried to keep her face neutral. Thera watched the Alpha depart, then turned to Elodie. Don't take it personally. He's carrying a lot on his shoulders. The Redwood threat is real, and some internal pack matters are pressing. But if you want my advice, find a way to show him you can handle the demands of being his mate. Don't wait for him to spell it out. He admires initiative. Elodie mustered a slight smile. I appreciate the advice, she replied. A flicker of determination ignited within her, propelled by her desire to assert her own agency. If Morgan was too busy to notice her or appreciate her presence, she would make herself noticed through her actions. For the rest of the morning, Elodie helped in small ways around the compound, from tidying storerooms to volunteering to deliver items between buildings. Whenever she ran into one of the council members, she greeted them politely, answered questions about her homeland, or asked them about the pack's operations. She learned that the Silver Mountain Pack was structured with Morgan at the top, supported by a tight-knit council of senior wolves, each overseeing a different department: security, hunting, supply, health, and so on. The beta, Saurin, was responsible for coordinating daily tasks and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Yet Saurin himself was nowhere to be seen that morning. Elodie wondered if he was simply avoiding her or if he was occupied elsewhere. A scarred beta was an intriguing figure. She recalled his silent demeanor and tried to imagine what role he played behind the scenes. A beta was second in command. After all, the right hand of the Alpha, typically less concerned with public appearances and more focused on the practicalities of leadership. Perhaps that explained his air of quiet authority, a presence that demanded respect without the need for many words. After midday, Elodie was crossing the courtyard with a small basket of dried herbs she had volunteered to deliver to the healing center when she nearly collided with Saurin himself. He rounded a corner from behind one of the buildings, moving with a silent swiftness that belied his size. She instinctively stepped back, almost dropping the basket. "Pardon me," she stammered, feeling her cheeks warm in embarrassment. He caught the basket before it slipped from her grasp, his large hand steadying hers. Up close, she noticed how the scar on his face pulled slightly at the skin around his eye. His dark gaze flicked from the basket to her face. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he released the basket and stepped back. "You're delivering those to the healers?" he asked, voice low, laced with a gravelly undertone. Yes, I offered to help. She tried to maintain steady eye contact, but his presence seemed to envelop the air around them. I just arrived, as you know, and I thought it would be good to learn how the pack organizes supplies. He nodded, though his expression remained guarded. They'll appreciate that. The healers are stretched thin lately. He paused for another beat, as if weighing whether to continue speaking. Finally, he said, I can escort you, if you're unsure of the way. A swirl of relief mixed with curiosity. She knew the general direction, but the healing center was on the far side of the compound, and the pathways twisted around multiple outbuildings. If it isn't trouble, she replied. Without another word, Saurin turned and began walking. She followed beside him, noticing the quiet ripple of tension that seemed to cling to his broad shoulders. He held himself stiffly, as if trying to maintain a distance. Yet his steps were unhurried, and though he barely looked at her, he kept pace so as not to rush her. They wove between several buildings until they reached a squat stone structure near a cluster of pine trees. 2 smaller huts stood nearby, presumably for storage and quarantine in case of contagious sickness. This is the healing center, Saurin said, stopping at the threshold. He reached for the door's latch and pulled it open for her. Elodie stepped inside, her nose instantly assaulted by the mixed scents of herbs, ointments, and antiseptics. Shelves lined the walls, laden with bottles, jars, and dried plants bound in twine. A woman in a simple linen dress knelt beside a low cot, tending to a bandaged figure who was lying still. A second healer, a younger man, noticed Elodie and Saurin entering. He approached, offering them a polite greeting. Elodie presented the basket. Thera mentioned you needed these. It's lavender, marigold, and some dried willow bark. The young man's eyes brightened. That's just what we were running short on. Thank you. I'm Oren, by the way. She handed him the basket, and he set it on a nearby table. Saurin lingered near the door, arms folded across his chest, watchful but silent. Elodie felt the subtle tension in the air as she surveyed the room. One of the cots was occupied by a wolf in human form with a heavily bandaged leg. Judging by the faint pinkish stain seeping through the cloth, his wound was recent. She shot Oren a curious glance, and he sighed. Another border dispute, Oren explained quietly. Thankfully, it wasn't too severe. The Redwood Pack is testing us, it seems. A surge of concern prickled through Elodie. Could this tension escalate into outright conflict? The idea of open skirmishes filled her with dread. She also understood a part of her role as mate to the Alpha might include bridging these conflicts diplomatically. Would Morgan expect her to stand by his side during negotiations, or rely on her for counsel? Thus far, he had scarcely spoken with her, so the notion felt distant and a bit absurd. She felt torn between the looming threat of Redwood aggression and her personal uncertainty about her position in this pack. Oren gave her a small smile. It's helpful to have an extra pair of hands around here, if you're willing. We could teach you a few of our methods. Perhaps you can bring new ideas as well. You said you have some knowledge of medicinal herbs? And she nodded, a spark of enthusiasm in her eyes. Some. My grandmother taught me about various plants that grow near the valley. Maybe some are unique. I'm happy to share whatever I know and learn in return. Oren seemed genuinely pleased. Before he could continue, though, Saurin spoke up from behind her, his voice low and measured. She has other obligations as well. The Alpha is expecting her to meet with the council soon about the ceremony, but if she finds time in her schedule, it might be beneficial. His statement was addressed more to her than to Oren, a gentle reminder that her role here extended beyond healing. Elodie glanced at him over her shoulder, meeting his steady gaze. "I'll manage my time," she said softly. "I'd like to help, if Morgan allows it." A faint flicker crossed Saurin's features, too slight to be called a smile, but not entirely neutral. "I'll walk you back," he said simply. Bidding Orin farewell, Elodie followed Saurin outside again. The sky had grown gray, clouds gathering overhead as though threatening rain. A gust of wind stirred the branches of the pines, sending the scent of pine needles through the air. Elodie felt an unexpected sense of calm in Saurin's silent company, as though despite his brooding aura, she could at least sense no malice from him. She spoke tentatively. "I hope I didn't overstep in offering my help. I just feel powerless if I do nothing." They walked along a gravel path, the compound alive with movement all around them, but Saurin's deep voice made the hustle fade into the background. "It's not overstepping to help. We value cooperation here. If the Redwood Pack escalates, every able-bodied member and ally will need to contribute." He did not elaborate on Redwood, nor did he mention Morgan's lack of engagement. Elodie weighed her next words carefully. "I'm grateful for any opportunity to learn. And if there's anything I should be mindful of about Morgan, or how to best show him I can be of help, I'd appreciate any insight." Saurin's pace slowed fractionally, as though taken aback by her direct question. He stared ahead, his eyes fixed on some invisible point. "Morgan is not unkind, but he carries burdens that he rarely shares. He puts the pack above all else, including himself. If he seems distant, it's because he is constantly thinking about how to protect our territory and our people." "But what about a mate?" Elodie blurted, feeling her cheeks warm at her own forwardness. Surely a mate is supposed to be closer to him than anyone else, sharing those burdens. A pause. Saurin exhaled, the sound faint. "In an ideal world, yes, but Morgan's always been guarded. You'll have to be patient." He paused again, then added, "If you're looking for his approval, do what needs to be done for the pack. Anticipate problems before he has to point them out. Show him you can bear the weight, so he doesn't have to worry about you as well." Elodie considered that. In some ways, it made sense. She remembered how her father used to emphasize that leadership demanded shouldering burdens for everyone's sake. Yet it sounded lonely, almost grim. Was that the path she was destined for if she bound herself to an alpha who saw her as another responsibility rather than a partner? They reached the courtyard again, and Saurin gave her a small nod of acknowledgement before stepping away. She watched him go, noticing the faint stiffness in his gait, perhaps a souvenir of an old injury. That scar on his face was not the only mark he bore, she imagined. But he carried them without complaint or explanation, a quiet sentinel in Morgan's shadow. Alone in the courtyard, Elodie inhaled the crisp mountain air and looked up at the slate-gray sky. She felt torn between the sense of purpose she discovered in assisting the pack and the anxiety that Morgan might never open his heart to her. She had a fleeting thought that maybe the day of the ceremony would bring clarity, that perhaps Morgan's aloof manner was merely a transitional phase. Little did she realize that fate had other plans. The carefully laid arrangements, the solemn vows, the promise that she was to be the Alpha's mate, would soon be tested by revelations and responsibilities that even Morgan could not predict. And in that crucible of conflicting loyalties, it would not be the Alpha at all who would claim the bond that had been promised, but the scarred Beta who watched quietly from the edges of her path. Rain battered the rooftops of the Silver Mountain compound that night, a steady drumming that muffled distant sounds of wolves patrolling the perimeter. In a matter of hours, the entire settlement was swathed in a misty haze, lantern lights glimmering faintly through the gloom. Elodie spent the evening with her family, sharing a modest meal in one of the private rooms assigned to guests. The mood was subdued but kind, and her uncle tried to fill the silence with tales of their journey, describing how the terrain changed so drastically upon entering the mountain region. Her mother asked quietly, "Do you think you can grow accustomed to life here? The pack is quite different from ours." Elodie glanced at the worn tapestry hanging on the wall. "I believe so," she said, though she felt less confident than her words implied. "I've already learned a few things about their daily routines. They take pride in discipline. Everyone has a role to play." Her mother studied her face. "And Morgan? Has he spoken to you much?" The question tightened the knot in Elodie's chest. "We've barely exchanged words," she admitted. "He's preoccupied. I suspect he's not pleased with a forced bond, but I intend to prove my usefulness." Her mother's gaze softened in sympathy. "Just remember, your value isn't solely in what you can do for them. You're a person with your own heart and mind, not just a tool to cement alliances." Elodie nodded, though she found her heart at odds with her mother's reassurance. Duty weighed heavily, reminding her that forging a future here was necessary to protect her home pack from the redwood threat or any other. There was no turning back. They talked late into the night, until the gentle lull of exhaustion overcame them. Her mother and uncle left for their own room, and Elodie returned to hers, lighting a small lamp to chase away the shadows. She perched on the edge of her bed, listening to the rain outside. The next day, she was supposed to meet the council formally, finalize details for the ceremony, and start acquainting herself with the rituals of an alpha's mate. She lay down, the blankets pulled up to her chin, sleep eluding her for a good while as her mind churned with possibilities. Finally, the rhythmic patter of raindrops lulled her into a restless slumber. When dawn arrived, the air smelled of damp earth. Elodie donned a modest dress and followed the directions Thera had given her to locate the council's meeting chamber. She found it adjacent to the main hall, accessible through a carved wooden door adorned with symbols of unity and strength. A circle of wolves standing shoulder to shoulder. Inside, an oval table dominated the center of the space, and Morgan was seated at its head. Several council members, including Galen, occupied seats along the table's length. One vacant chair stood near Morgan, evidently reserved for Elodie. She took it hesitantly, feeling the weight of their gazes. Morgan offered a short nod. "Good, you're punctual," he said in a businesslike tone. "We have matters to address regarding Redwood's activity on the western border. They've intruded twice in the past week. We must respond decisively." He lifted a parchment. "Our scouts confirm Redwood is trying to gauge our patrol patterns. I won't allow them to think we can be cornered." One of the council members, a middle-aged woman with salt and pepper hair named Isla, spoke up. "We could bolster the western patrols, but that leaves the northern ridge vulnerable. If Redwood is cunning, they might feint west and come at us from the north. I suggest a rotation system with decoys." Morgan nodded, though his expression remained tight with focus. "Agreed. We won't weaken one front to strengthen another. We will rearrange the guard shifts. Saurin will be in charge of the final assignments." Elodie searched for Saurin, noting he was not at the table. That was strange for a beta, but she recalled that he often stayed behind the scenes, planning. Maybe he was out verifying security. She listened quietly to the rest of the discussion, absorbing the details of Redwood's encroachments and the pack's planned responses. Occasionally she thought about chiming in, but it seemed the conversation was far beyond the scope of her immediate knowledge. The tension was palpable, a reminder that Silver Mountain was on the brink of conflict. At last, they moved on to the subject of Elodie's ceremony. Morgan looked to her, his voice measured. We have planned the official union for 3 days from now. The pack will gather in the courtyard. We'll invite a few representatives from neighboring neutral packs as witnesses. The ritual of the vow will be led by our spiritual elder. Have you had time to review the tradition? Elodie had been given a set of scrolls the previous evening. She had read through descriptions of how the alpha's mate was presented to the pack, sworn in with a vow of unity, and then recognized in a formal dinner. Though the tradition was entirely new to her, she had memorized the steps as best she could. Yes, she replied. I've read the details. Morgan inclined his head. Then we will proceed as planned. Thera will assist you with attire and protocol. Is there anything else you wish to add? His tone suggested a courtesy rather than genuine interest. Elodie shook her head, not sure if voicing her uncertainties would help. Instead, she ventured, I appreciate the preparations. I want to contribute. After the ceremony, I'd like to spend time learning about the pack's structure, maybe assist in the healing center or the archives. A subtle furrow appeared on Morgan's brow, but he nodded. That can be arranged, he said shortly. With that, the council dismissed the subject and shifted focus back to Redwood. Elodie listened as they dissected patrol routes and how many wolves they could afford to spare for a potential confrontation. She stole a few glances at Morgan, trying to read the lines of his face. He was undeniably attractive, though in a cold, distant way that made him seem unapproachable. She wondered if there was a day when he had felt something akin to excitement about taking a mate, or if the concept of romance was buried beneath his strategic obligations. The meeting concluded, and the council members dispersed, leaving Elodie alone with Morgan for a moment. She stood, half expecting him to say something personal, perhaps a small reassurance. Instead, he picked up his parchments. I have duties to attend to, he said. Thera will find you soon. Without waiting for a response, he swept out of the chamber, cloak trailing behind him. Elodie let out a breath she had been holding. She tried to quell the sting of disappointment, reminding herself that forging a relationship took time. Perhaps once Redwood's threat settled, Morgan might find a moment for more personal conversation. She left the chamber and wandered into the corridor, feeling a subtle emptiness gnawing at her. Before she could dwell on her conflicting emotions for too long, she saw Saurin approaching from the opposite end of the hallway. He wore a dark tunic and trousers, and he carried a small bundle of maps under one arm. His scar stood out in the dim torchlight. She realized he must have been involved in some planning session elsewhere in the compound. He paused when he spotted her, inclining his head in a greeting. Elodie, he acknowledged. Done with the council meeting? She nodded. Yes. They discussed Redwood and the ceremony. I see you're busy with border plans. She gestured to the maps. Saurin dipped his head again. We're rearranging patrols on the Western Front. I need to speak with each squad leader before nightfall. Elodie felt a prickle of curiosity. Do you think Redwood will attack soon? Or is this all just posturing? He paused for a moment, considering his response. Our pack's territory is large. Redwood's alpha is ambitious. Even if they don't attack outright, these incursions wear us down, keep us on edge. Morgan wants to appear unshakable, but Redwood is not easily cowed. If we show weakness, they'll exploit it. If we show too much strength, they might call our bluff and push for open conflict. It's a careful balance. She saw the slightest flicker of frustration in his eyes. That's a heavy burden, she whispered, voicing what she had deduced. For you? For Morgan, for everyone. His jaw clenched. We do what we must. This land is our home, our legacy. We can't let Redwood step all over it. He glanced around, noticing the corridor was empty. Lowering his voice, he added, "If you sense tension from Morgan, it's partly Redwood. He's in a difficult position." Elodie lowered her eyes briefly, then lifted them to meet his. "I don't mind tension," she said softly. "I just want to be useful, not just an ornament to stand at his side for ceremonies." A faint shadow of sympathy crossed Saurin's face. "Then keep doing what you're doing. The pack sees it. They appreciate someone willing to roll up their sleeves, even if it's out of a sense of duty." His words sent a small surge of warmth through her. She nodded, offering a tentative smile. He gave a curt nod in return, his scarred face inscrutable, then continued down the hallway. As she watched him leave, she reflected on how at least Saurin seemed to understand something of her predicament, even if he was not one for extended conversation or reassurance. There was a quiet honesty to him that contrasted sharply with Morgan's aloofness. Thera found Elodie soon after and led her to a room where several garments were draped over a long table. A tall mirror stood at one end. "We have some options for the ceremony attire," Thera explained, gesturing at the dresses. "The Alpha's mate is typically presented in white or pale gray, symbolizing purity and unity." Elodie ran her fingers over the fabric of a flowing white gown embroidered with silver thread along the neckline and sleeves. The craftsmanship was exquisite, though a pang in her chest reminded her this was not a romantic union in the traditional sense. Still, she forced a polite smile. "They're beautiful." Thera nodded. "It's part of our tradition to show that you enter the pack with a spirit of peace. You'll walk through the courtyard, accompanied by a few members of your family and the Alpha's closest allies. After the vow, you and Morgan will share a symbolic drink, representing the merging of your lives. Then a feast will follow. It's usually a festive tree occasion." Elodie sighed softly, gazing at her reflection in the mirror. "I want to do it justice," she said, forcing conviction into her tone. In the hours that followed, she tried on different gowns, checking how they draped over her figure, how the embroidery complemented her features. Thera pinned and adjusted, occasionally tossing out comments about how each design represented various facets of the pack's identity. Elodie listened dutifully, but part of her mind wandered to Redwood's mounting threat, to Morgan's cold detachment, and to Saurin's reserved presence that somehow felt more comforting. The entire scenario felt surreal, as though she were acting out a part assigned to her by an ancient script. By late afternoon, the rain clouds had dispersed, leaving a pale sun low on the horizon. Thera excused herself to speak with one of the elders. Elodie, having chosen a soft white gown with subtle silver accents, walked outside to find a breath of fresh air. She moved toward the courtyard's edge, away from the bustle, pausing near a wooden fence that overlooked a slope leading down to a rocky stream. The forest beyond seemed endless, tall pines swaying gently in the breeze. For a long moment, Elodie allowed herself to simply exist in that silent stretch of nature, feeling the wind tease her hair. She closed her eyes, hoping for a sense of clarity. She tried to imagine her life here, fulfilling the role of Alpha's mate, navigating the politics, forging alliances, and perhaps one day forging a real bond with Morgan. But each time she pictured Morgan's face, it was overshadowed by the memory of Saurin's scarred features and the unwavering calm in his eyes. A wave of guilt rushed over her for even thinking about the beta when she was betrothed to the Alpha. She scolded herself, pulling her thoughts back to the vow she would soon make. Her life would be bound to Morgan's. That was the law of the pack and the tradition set in motion long before she was born. She tried to quell the quiet voice inside that said something was wrong. that maybe she deserved more than a forced arrangement with a man who seemed to have no space in his life for her. Her solitude was broken by a sudden rustle of feet on gravel. She turned to see her uncle approaching, his expression guarded. He bowed his head politely, then joined her by the fence, resting his arms on the top rail. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the water glint below. "They're finishing final preparations for the ceremony," he said gently. "Your mother told me you've been working hard to fit in." Elodie shrugged, trying to sound light. "I'm doing what I can. This pack demands a lot of its members." He looked at her with genuine concern. "Are you okay with this? Truly? If your heart is too troubled, there might still be a way to speak with Morgan, negotiate something else." She managed a wry smile. "Negotiate what? The treaty's terms are clear. Morgan expects me to become his mate. Our family pledged me as part of that agreement. I can't back out." Her uncle's face clouded. "I remember your father telling me about these arrangements. The older generation believed strongly in them, but I never imagined it would feel so heavy. You're still young, with a life ahead of you. I wish I could protect you from regret." His words pricked tears in Elodie's eyes, and she blinked them away. "I'll find my way. I just need to be strong." Before her uncle could respond, the courtyard's large gate swung open, and a small group of riders entered. At the forefront was a slender woman atop a chestnut mare, followed by 2 men. They all wore travel-stained clothes, and one of the men had a bandaged arm. Guards from Silver Mountain approached, exchanging words in hushed voices. Elodie's attention was drawn to Morgan, who strode out from the main hall, posture rigid with authority. He greeted the newcomers with curt politeness, listening intently as they spoke. She overheard one exclamation. "Redwood is massing near the old logging road," the woman said in a terse voice. "We barely escaped a skirmish. They're testing your boundary lines again. They'll push further if you don't respond." Morgan's eyes flashed. "We will respond," he promised, voice cutting through the courtyard air. "Report to the healers. Saurin will meet with you for details. We can't allow Redwood to harass travelers on our territory." Elodie's uncle leaned closer, his voice low. "It sounds like Redwood is escalating. I hope this doesn't interfere with the ceremony." A pang of apprehension gripped Elodie. Conflict loomed, and the memory of Redwood's injured victim in the healing center came flooding back. The tension in the compound rose palpably as the newcomers were led away. Morgan was left standing by the gate, a stormy expression contorting his features. For a second, Elodie considered approaching him, offering support or comfort. But his posture was tense, shoulders drawn up as though preparing for a fight. He slipped inside the main hall without so much as a glance in her direction. She exhaled slowly. Perhaps now was not the time. The next few days would be crucial. She suspected Redwood might act sooner than anyone anticipated. A flicker of worry rose in her chest. What if Redwood launched a strike that overshadowed the ceremony entirely? What if the union between her and Morgan, meant to strengthen both packs, never even had a chance to stabilize the region? Her uncle's gentle squeeze on her shoulder grounded her. "If you need me, I'm here," he murmured. She mustered a grateful smile. "Thank you." Their quiet moment was cut short by Thera hurrying over. "Elodie, we need you inside. The seamstress is waiting to do final adjustments on the gown," she said, somewhat breathless. "The ceremony is in 3 days, and with Redwood's latest aggression, we don't want any last-minute chaos." Elodie nodded, bidding her uncle farewell for now. As she headed back with Thera, she caught one more glimpse of Morgan's grim profile through a window in the main hall. He was deep in conversation with 2 of his men, likely planning a countermove to Redwood's provocation. The weight of the impending vow hung around her like a heavy cloak. She was about to pledge herself to a man consumed by the responsibilities of leadership, whose personal warmth remained locked behind a fortress of duty. Yet she had no illusions. Once the vow was made, there would be no turning back. The pack would see her as the Alpha's mate, fully bound to Morgan for life. For the next few days, tensions simmered throughout the compound. Patrols doubled, and news trickled in that Redwood scouts were seen patrolling near contested roads. Nonetheless, the ceremony preparations pressed on. The courtyard was tidied, fresh lanterns were hung, and a platform was erected. Elodie spent her time alternating between last-minute dress fittings and assisting in the healing center, where more minor injuries from border scuffles were treated. She barely saw Morgan at all, aside from a glimpse here or there as he bustled between strategy sessions. On those occasions, their eyes met briefly, but the glances held neither intimacy nor reassurance. Saurin, meanwhile, was everywhere, quietly orchestrating security, rearranging schedules, and overseeing the well-being of visitors. Twice, Elodie caught his eye in passing, and each time he nodded politely, a subtle acknowledgement that lingered in her memory long after. She marveled at how Morgan and Saurin were such different men, each integral to the pack's survival yet exuding entirely distinct energies. Morgan was a storm, distant thunder gathering on the horizon, promising devastation to those who opposed him. Saurin was more like the silent undercurrent of a deep river, calm yet powerful, guiding and shaping the flow. On the eve of the ceremony, the sun sank behind the mountains in a blaze of orange and red, painting the sky with a fleeting sense of serenity. Elodie stood in the courtyard, gazing up at the silhouette of tall pines, trying to ground herself for what lay ahead. Tomorrow she would recite her vows, drink from the ceremonial cup with Morgan, and formally become the Alpha's mate. The pack would welcome her. Redwood might retreat or advance, only time would tell. An ache in her chest spoke of the uncertainty that lingered like a shadow. She wished she had discovered a thread of emotional connection with Morgan, a sign that they could grow from a forced alliance into something real. But his heart was shuttered, locked away behind obligations. She feared that once the vow was made, she would be alone in her marriage, an outsider even in the Alpha's private chambers. Still, she reminded herself of her mother's words. She was a person with her own heart and mind, not just a bargaining chip. Perhaps in time, she could warm Morgan's heart, or at least carve out her own sense of belonging in the pack. She took a slow breath, letting the cool evening air fill her lungs. Duty or not, she would meet her fate tomorrow, determined to remain steadfast in her convictions. Night fell, still and watchful, as though the entire compound was bracing for something monumental. Unbeknownst to Elodie, fate was already stirring beneath the surface. The vow she had prepared to make would be but a spark, igniting forces she could not yet comprehend. And in the swirl of that unfolding drama, the beta's calm and steady presence would soon loom larger than she ever imagined, casting a light across the darkness she feared might swallow her whole. The morning of the ceremony broke with sunlight piercing through a smattering of clouds, illuminating the courtyard where rows of chairs and decorations had been arranged. Despite the frequent rains, the Silver Mountain Pack had spared no effort in preparing for the union of their Alpha, and the woman promised to him by an ancient treaty. Evergreen boughs, tied with pale ribbons, draped across the railing's white petals were scattered on the newly swept ground. In one corner, musicians warmed up quietly, their lilting melodies mingling with the crisp air. Elodie stood in the side chamber where she had dressed in the carefully tailored gown, her heart thudding like a restless drum within her chest. The soft white fabric seemed to reflect the early morning sun, while the silver embroidery at her collar and cuffs caught the light each time she moved. She turned to face the mirror, studying the expression in her own eyes, trying to gather courage. The reflection seemed to reveal more than just nerves. There was a flicker of apprehension she could not entirely suppress. She closed her eyes, inhaling slowly, recalling the steps of the ceremony she had memorized. First, she would walk down the aisle created by the seated guests. Her mother and uncle would flank her, presenting her to the pack as a symbol of both her heritage and her willingness to merge that heritage into Silver Mountain. Morgan would be waiting at the front, clad in ceremonial attire, prepared to make his vow. After their spoken words, they would share the ritual drink from a carved wooden cup, sealing the official bond. The final step would be her public acceptance, a moment in which Morgan introduced her as his mate. When she felt her composure slip, she reminded herself of her father's unwavering belief in forging alliances for the greater good. She told herself that this might still become a fruitful partnership, that perhaps once Redwood's threat subsided, Morgan would grant her a glimpse of genuine warmth. More than that, she hoped to find a place, not merely in name, but in spirit. A subtle tap at the door made her whirl around. "Come in," she called softly. The door cracked open to reveal her mother, who entered with gentle steps. The older woman wore a modest but elegant dress in subdued colors, her eyes brimming with pride and sorrow all at once. "It is time," her mother said quietly, giving Elodie a tender smile. "Are you ready?" Elodie exhaled, trying to loosen the knot in her stomach. "As ready as I can be," she whispered. Then she mustered a more resolute nod. "Let us proceed." Together, they walked from the chamber into the hallway, where they were joined by Elodie's uncle. He held a supportive hand out for her. She took it, grateful for the grounding presence of family. They made their way outside into the courtyard, where rows of chairs were filled with Silver Mountain Pack members and a few invited representatives from neighboring groups. The air hummed with a mixture of excitement and tension. No one was oblivious to Redwood's recent provocations. Guards lined the edges, their watchfulness unrelenting. At the front of the courtyard, beneath a simple arch adorned with pine branches, stood Morgan. He wore a dark tunic set off by gleaming silver stitching, and a cloak that fell to his knees. His stance was rigid, jaw set as though prepared for conflict at any moment. When Elodie's gaze met his, a flicker of something, perhaps relief or fleeting admiration, shaded his expression, but it was gone so quickly that she barely believed she had seen it at all. She advanced along the aisle, the hush of the crowd accentuating each step. A gentle breeze stirred the ribbons and evergreen leaves, sending a mild fragrance drifting around her. At the last row of chairs, her mother and uncle paused, stepping aside to let her continue forward on her own. She walked the remaining distance, acutely aware of every eye upon her, heart pounding with the finality of the vows she was about to take. Morgan inclined his head in greeting. His eyes, a cold gray, swept over her attire before settling on her face. The spiritual elder, a wizened figure named Dorian, positioned himself between them. He wore ceremonial robes and carried a staff carved with symbols of the pack's lineage. In a deep, resonant voice, he welcomed those gathered, speaking of tradition, unity, and the responsibilities of leadership. "These vows mark the bond between Alpha Morgan and Elodie," Dorian intoned. "Their union strengthens the fabric of this pack. Today we affirm that alliances forged in days past continue to uphold our future." He gave Elodie a solemn look. "Elodie, do you come freely to stand at this Alpha's side, to uphold the honor and prosperity of the Silver Mountain Pack, to merge your lineage with ours." Elodie's throat felt tight, though in truth, it was hardly a free choice. She sensed the eyes of the crowd upon her, including the watchful glances of Redwood's invited representatives, two stern-faced envoys who had quietly arrived to witness the event. She swallowed and replied, "I do." Morgan squared his shoulders, as though preparing for a pronouncement of war rather than a vow of companionship. Dorian's gaze shifted to him. "Alpha Morgan, do you accept Elodie as your mate, under the laws of this pack and the traditions of our forebears? Will you protect her, guide her, and grant her a place in your heart and home?" A strained moment of silence followed. Then Morgan stated, "I do," in a clear, unwavering voice. Yet to Elodie's ears, there was no tenderness in that declaration, merely a sense of obligation. Dorian produced a wooden cup, carved with entwined wolf shapes. From a small flask, he poured a fragrant liquid, an herbal infusion that symbolized the merging of separate paths. He passed the cup to Elodie first. "Drink," he said, "and accept the bond within you." Her hand trembled as she lifted the cup to her lips, taking a single sip of the bitter, floral concoction. She swallowed, her heartbeat thrumming in her ears, then extended the cup to Morgan. He took his own sip, expression unreadable, before handing the cup back to Dorian. Dorian raised the vessel as though in silent blessing. "Then let it be known that these two stand united before the pack, bound by vow and tradition." He turned to the assembled crowd. "Welcome your new mated pair." A scattering of applause and subdued cheers rippled through the courtyard, though the mood was more wary than celebratory. The Redwood envoys exchanged looks, and several of Morgan's senior guards hovered near the perimeter, scanning the horizon. Even in this moment of official unity, the specter of Redwood's hostility hung over everything. Morgan faced Elodie, dipping his head in a gesture that could have been taken as a greeting or an invitation for a more intimate display. Half expecting him to offer a soft kiss or some token of affection, Elodie simply stood there, her cheeks warming from nervousness and the intensity of the onlookers' scrutiny. Instead, Morgan gave her a brief, formal nod and beckoned her to turn toward the crowd with him. They did so, side by side, as Dorian announced that a feast would follow in the main hall. Amid the swirl of movement, chairs scraping back, people rising to congratulate them, Elodie felt conflicting emotions swirl in her chest. She was now, officially, the mate of Silver Mountain's Alpha. She had done everything asked of her. And yet there was an undeniable emptiness in Morgan's eyes, a distance that told her this was only the beginning of a complicated road. She spotted Saurin near the back, standing with a group of younger guards. His imposing silhouette and scarred cheek made him instantly recognizable. While most of the pack members were clapping politely, Saurin simply inclined his head, his gaze resting on her for a fraction longer than anyone else's. She experienced a queer tightening in her chest, an awareness that despite all appearances, Saurin was the only person within Silver Mountain who had truly seen her hopes and uncertainties. If only Morgan could meet her eyes with such quiet empathy. Guests began to move toward the main hall for the feast, but Morgan laid a hand lightly on Elodie's elbow, steering her aside before she could join her mother. "We need to speak quickly," he murmured, his tone hushed. "I've received news that Redwood's Alpha, in a show of power, might try to sabotage, or at least interrupt this gathering. Keep yourself near the center of the hall, away from the doors. We'll have guards posted at every entrance. If anything occurs, I need you to remain calm." Elodie's heart lurched. "You think they'd attack during the feast?" Morgan's lip curled slightly, as though the mere mention of Redwood set him on edge. "They might send a small force, a disruption rather than a full assault. But we can't ignore the possibility. His gaze flicked to the Redwood envoys, who were disappearing into the hall. Do as I say, for your own safety. Any illusion of a joyful wedding day vanished under the weight of his warning. Elodie nodded, feeling both disappointment and a surge of worry. She had just become the Alpha's mate, and already the only words he seemed capable of offering her were orders for her protection. Inside the main hall, tables were laden with steaming platters of roasted meat, vegetables, bread, and pitchers of water and wine. At the center of the hall, a raised table awaited Elodie and Morgan, along with high-ranking members of the pack's council. She took her seat next to Morgan. On her other side was Galen, who offered her a kind smile and said softly, "Congratulations, my dear. May your future bring the pack much-needed harmony." She thanked him in a subdued voice, noticing that Morgan was still scanning the room for any sign of unusual activity, barely acknowledging the well-wishers. The feast began, though the atmosphere felt tense. People forced laughter and tried to converse over the meal, but eyes kept darting to the entrances, expecting trouble at any moment. In the midst of this guarded revelry, Elodie sipped a bit of the wine poured for her, nibbling on a piece of bread to calm her roiling stomach. She attempted conversation with the council members seated nearby, yet her mind kept drifting to Redwood's threat. Would they truly risk an open confrontation in the heart of Silver Mountain's territory? She was about to reach for another morsel when a sudden commotion erupted at the far end of the hall. One of the guards stationed at the entrance let out a sharp exclamation, and the door banged open. A figure staggered in, another Silver Mountain sentinel, panting and clutching a bleeding arm. He managed to gasp. Ambush Redwood at the eastern gata before collapsing onto the floor, unconscious. Instantly, the hall erupted into chaos. Guests stood abruptly, chairs scraping back, frightened whispers and startled shouts rippling through the gathering. Morgan rose from his seat with fluid speed, barking orders to his guards. Several council members sprang up, while others tried to herd the guests, particularly the non-combatants, away from the doors. "Escort the women and children to the safe rooms," Morgan shouted, grabbing his cloak draped over a nearby chair. He looked at Elodie, expression grim. "You, stay here, behind the table if necessary. Saurin will help maintain order." From the rear of the hall, Saurin appeared as if summoned by name, forging his way through the panicked throng. He caught Morgan's glance, and the Alpha gestured curtly. "Secure the entrances. Get the wounded man to the healers. Move!" Saurin bowed his head in acknowledgement, stepping swiftly toward the door. The Redwood envoys, who had been among the crowd, wore expressions of shock that could have been genuine or feigned. Elodie could not tell. They muttered something about having no knowledge of an ambush, and Morgan's glare in their direction conveyed deep suspicion. Before Elodie could do more than stand, her mother rushed to her side. "Are you all right? We must get you to safety," she said, alarm weaving through her voice. Elodie gripped her mother's hand, adrenaline surging. "I'll be fine," she promised, though she hardly felt certain of it. The next moments were a blur of movement as the remaining guests scrambled to comply with Morgan's commands. She spotted her uncle assisting an elderly couple toward an exit that presumably led to a secure part of the compound. Morgan hurried after a squad of guards, but before he disappeared through the doors, he paused to look over his shoulder. His eyes locked with Elodie's for an instant. He opened his mouth as though to speak, but no words came. Then he turned away and vanished into the corridor, presumably heading to face Redwood's intruders. The hall emptied rapidly. Elodie found herself standing near the main table, flanked by her mother and a few anxious members of Morgan's circle who had stayed behind to gather last-minute supplies or rally the stragglers. A shiver of fear trickled down her spine. She sensed that Redwood's aggression might not remain confined to the eastern gate. If the intruders pressed their advantage, they could storm the hall next. She spun around to see Saurin entering again, grim determination etched across his scarred face. "Elodie," he said urgently, "come. We're moving you to a safer chamber." She glanced at her mother, uncertain, but then nodded. Saurin led them through the side passage, deeper into the compound. With a hand on Elodie's shoulder, he guided her and her mother swiftly, the corridors echoing with distant clashes and frantic footsteps. The calm of the wedding feast had shattered in an instant, replaced by the stark reality of war on their doorstep. They reached a stout wooden door where 2 guards stood watch. Saurin pushed the door open to reveal a small, windowless room furnished only with a few chairs and a makeshift cot. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice low. "We have multiple lines of defense, but if Redwood breaks through, we'll move you deeper still." Elodie's mother clung to her daughter's arm, face pale. But Elodie, caught in a surge of conflicting emotions, grasped Saurin's sleeve before he could step away. "You're going to fight, aren't you? Is the situation that dire?" His dark eyes flickered with urgency. "We won't let Redwood overrun us," he answered simply, "but we must protect our people. I need to coordinate with Morgan and the others." She tightened her grip, heart pounding. "Please be careful." In that moment, her voice trembled with more raw emotion than she had ever shown him before. A flicker of surprise passed across Saurin's face, though he quickly hid it behind a mask of resolve. With a curt nod, he stepped back, and the door shut with a dull thud. A bolt slid into place on the outside, locking them in for safety. Silence enveloped them, broken only by the muffled shouts and footfalls that reverberated through the walls. Elodie's mother sank into one of the chairs, trying to steady her breathing. Elodie joined her, hands clasped in her lap, mind racing. She had expected Redwood's aggression eventually, but not with this sudden brutality on the day of her ceremonial union. The very alliance that was meant to solidify the pack's standing now teetered on the brink of full-scale conflict. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Elodie and her mother waited in the cramped room, eyes locked on the door. Every crash and faint roar made them flinch, unsure how close the fighting was. Occasionally, hurried footsteps passed outside, but no one opened the door. The single torch flickering on the wall cast dancing shadows, heightening the sense of claustrophobia. Elodie's thoughts spun. She worried for Morgan, for Saurin, for the wounded guards. She felt the crushing vulnerability of being sealed in a room, unable to help. Her father's teachings about alliances, about fulfilling one's duty, came back to haunt her. She was the Alpha's mate, should she not be by Morgan's side, lending what aid she could. And yet, tradition decreed she stay protected. Guilt pricked at her. After what might have been half an hour or more, the bolt on the door finally slid back. Elodie jolted to her feet, her mother gasping softly in alarm. The door opened, revealing one of the pack's younger sentinels. He looked sweaty and shaken, a cut bleeding above his eyebrow. "We're clearing the central corridor," he said breathlessly. Redwood was pushed back, but skirmishes continue near the gates. "Saurin says it's safe to move you to the secondary safe house deeper in the mountains if you prefer. Otherwise, you can stay here." Elodie stepped forward, her voice wavering between fear and determination. "Where is Morgan? Is he safe?" The sentinel hesitated. "He and Saurin are at the east gate. There's a standoff with Redwood's forces. They've pulled back slightly, but we don't know if they plan another push." A ripple of tension shuddered through Elodie. "I want to go to the healing center," she stated, surprising herself. "If there are wounded, I can help. That's what I was trained to do." at least partially. Her mother's hand flew to her elbow. Elodie, it's not safe to roam the corridors. There could be more redwood infiltrators. The sentinel looked uncertain. Our instructions were to keep you out of harm's way. But seeing the determination flash in Elodie's eyes, he softened. If you insist, I can guide you quickly. The healing center is near the northern courtyard. We have a small guard contingent there. Elodie turned to her mother, voice trembling with earnestness. I can do more than just cower behind a locked door. Please, let me at least try to help those who are injured. Her mother regarded her for a moment, tears shining in her eyes, then nodded. I understand. Go, she said softly. But be careful. The sentinel ushered Elodie out into the corridor, leaving her mother under the watchful eye of another guard. The hallway was a tableau of half-lit chaos, broken chairs, scattered papers, the acrid smell of smoke and fear. Bodies of a few redwood intruders lay near the corridor's end, while Silver Mountain wolves stood guard. Elodie's pulse thundered as she followed the sentinel at a brisk pace, heart lurching with each sign of violence. She tried not to look at the fallen forms. They took a back stairwell, eventually emerging into the narrower passage that led to the healing center. The door was open, revealing Oren, the young healer, moving frantically between several wounded guards. 3 makeshift cots had been placed on the floor, while bandages, bowls of water, and herbs littered every surface. The smell of blood was thick in the air. Oren? Elodie called, stepping inside. I came to help. He spun around, eyes wide with relief. Thank the spirits. We have more injured on the way, and I'm running low on certain poultices. He paused, taking in her ceremonial dress spattered with dust. Are you sure? This is no place for... I'm sure, Elodie cut him off. Tell me what to do. Oren wasted no time. He shoved a bowl of water into her hands. Clean that wound. He gestured to a guard who moaned softly, blood seeping through a rag tied around his torso. Press cloth there and keep pressure. Then we'll bind it. Elodie knelt, ignoring the protests of the sentinel who had escorted her. She dabbed water onto the guard's wound, her hands trembling, but she steeled herself. She murmured words of reassurance, focusing on recalling everything her grandmother once taught her about tending lacerations. Within minutes, she had stifled the bleeding with firm pressure, layering strips of bandage until Oren arrived to finish with an herb-based salve. The god groaned in pain, but managed a nod of thanks. They moved rapidly from one injured wolf to another, stems of marigold and yarrow mixing in bowls, bandages soaking with antiseptic. Each time the door banged open, they braced for a new wave of wounded. The chaos continued for what felt like endless hours, until at last there was a lull, no fresh injuries arriving, and the more severely hurt had been stabilized or moved to better quarters. Elodie collapsed onto a stool, arms spattered with dried blood, her head throbbing. The sentinel who had guided her hovered by the door, frowning in concern. The east gate is secure for now, he said, but Redwood's forces still camp outside. We're in a stalemate. She nodded numbly. Morgan, Saurin, the rest. They were all out there in the smoky, battered gate area, trying to fend off further assaults. She wondered if Redwood might retreat permanently, or simply wait for a more advantageous time. A swirl of dread curled in her stomach. Oren placed a hand on her shoulder. Thank you, he breathed. We couldn't have managed without extra hands. Elodie mustered a faint, weary smile. The sentinel cleared his throat. I can escort you back to the safer area now. It's still not advisable for you to be in harm's way. Elodie glanced around at the bloodied floor, the battered faces of the wounded. She had done her best, but the day's events felt like a nightmare. She rose to follow the sentinel, who led her back through the corridors that were eerily silent after so much conflict. Guards were stationed at intervals, weapons in hand, eyes sharp. Just as they approached a corridor branching off toward the main hall, they saw a figure moving in their direction. Elodie tensed, until she recognized Saurin's hulking form. Relief surged through her. A slash in his tunic revealed a shallow cut on his bicep, and he had a layer of grime on his face. His gaze flicked from the sentinel to Elodie. Concern broke through his stoic mask. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, voice tight with fatigue. "I told you to stay hidden." She stiffened at his tone. "I chose to help in the healing center. They needed extra hands." His stern expression wavered, as though caught between reprimanding her and admiring her determination. Finally he exhaled. "I'm glad you're unhurt," he muttered. "Come, Morgan has been looking for you." Elodie's heart skipped. "Is he hurt?" Saurin shook his head. "No, but he's preoccupied. He wants to ensure you're secure." They trudged through the battered corridors until they reached the main courtyard, now littered with broken chairs and scattered remnants of the disrupted feast. Several guards stood in clusters, speaking in hushed tones. In the midst of it all, Morgan paced near a table upon which maps were spread. His tunic was torn, but aside from some dust and minor scuffs, he seemed physically fine. The moment he caught sight of Elodie, he strode over, a swirl of conflicting emotions visible in his eyes. "Where have you been?" he demanded, voice edged with anger. "I told you to stay safe." She faltered under his glare. I went to the healing center. They needed help." Morgan looked as if he was about to snap back, but Saurin stepped forward, posture neutral. "She was assisting the wounded, and it was invaluable. We needed every capable person." His words were measured, but there was a protective note that made Elodie blink in surprise. Morgan pressed his lips together, clearly wrestling with the desire to chastise her versus acknowledging the dire circumstances. Finally, he grunted in grudging acceptance. "We'll talk about this later." He threw a glance at the gate. For now, Redwood has withdrawn to the forest's edge. Their alpha hasn't personally shown his face. He might be waiting for reinforcements. We can't let our guard down. He turned sharply to Saurin. "Increase patrols around the perimeter. Send word to the council that I want an emergency meeting at dawn tomorrow. And see to it that Elodie returns to the safe quarters. This time she stays there." Saurin's jaw tightened, but he bowed slightly in acknowledgement. Elodie felt her cheeks burn with resentment. She wanted to protest Morgan's assumption that she should be sequestered, but the Alpha had already pivoted to rejoin his haggard guards. Saurin's gaze flipped to her. "I'll walk you back," he murmured, gesturing toward the dim corridors that led to the secure rooms. Feeling drained and emotionally raw, Elodie followed. As they passed through the carnage-laced courtyard, she noticed a ring of redwoods fallen lying on the ground, some half shifted into their wolf forms. This was not the future she had hoped for. The day of her union was supposed to be a turning point for peace, a melding of alliances. Instead, it had become a day of bloodshed and sorrow. She wondered if Redwood attacked precisely because of that union, to show they would not be intimidated by any new arrangement. They walked in silence until they reached the door behind which her mother still waited. By now, her mother had emerged into the corridor, speaking in hushed tones with a pair of guards. Relief blossomed on her face when she saw Elodie safe, though her gaze flickered worriedly to the dried blood on Elodie's gown. Saurin cleared his throat, addressing them both. "Stay here tonight. Keep the door locked. We'll maintain patrols. Tomorrow morning the Alpha convenes a council. Hopefully we'll know Redwood's next move by then." Elodie nodded, her eyes drifting up to meet Saurin's. She caught a glimpse of compassion there, beneath his scarred exterior. An unexpected ache tugged at her. They were all entangled in duties that left little room for personal feelings. As Saurin turned to leave, her mother placed a trembling hand on Elodie's shoulder. "My child," she whispered, voice loaded with worry. "You seem so much in just one day here. Are you sure this is where you belong?" Elodie felt tears sting her eyes, a surge of overwhelmed exhaustion. "I don't know," she admitted, hugging her mother fiercely. "But it's done. I'm the Alpha's mate now, bound to this pack." Her mother stroked her hair gently. "Perhaps in time, Morgan's heart will soften, and Redwood's hostility will fade. This doesn't have to be your life forever, war and bloodshed." Elodie wished she could embrace that hope, but the memory of Redwood's bodies and the aloof, angry look in Morgan's eyes haunted her. She sensed something shifting in her destiny, something the pack elders had not foreseen. In the smoldering aftermath of Redwood's assault, the lines of old treaties might no longer matter as much as the raw truths carved by fang and blade. That night, Elodie lay awake on a cot in the cramped room, sleep elusive as she replayed the day's tragedies over and over in her mind. Her official bond to Morgan weighed upon her like an iron chain, while a quiet sense of guilt throbbed whenever she thought of Saurin's unwavering help and understanding. The vow she had made was meant to be unbreakable, and yet her heart felt no real connection to the man who was now her husband. Instead, it was the beta, silent, scarred, and steadfast, who lingered in her thoughts like a beacon in a storm. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her. She slipped into a fitful sleep, haunted by dreams of redwood wolves howling at the gates, of blood seeping into white fabric, of an uncertain future where her mate's touch was distant and cold. She did not yet realize how soon that future would test her courage again, nor how the beta's place in her life would loom ever larger, defying the boundaries of rank and obligation. Dawn broke bleak and overcast, shrouding the Silver Mountain compound in a somber gray light. A layer of fog crept through the trees, coiling around the walls, as if nature itself sensed the tension gripping the pack. Guards patrolled warily along the ramparts, scanning the forest for any sign of Redwood's forces. The usual morning bustle, chatter, chores, training drills, was muted by the previous day's conflict. Elodie stirred from her restless sleep, dressed in fresh garments, plain and practical rather than ceremonial, and made her way with her mother to a shared breakfast area. Many werewolf families had retreated to smaller, safer quarters, and the cooking was minimal, just enough to keep everyone fed. The mood was subdued, as though the entire pack held its breath, waiting for Redwood's next move. She parted from her mother, who wanted to gather news from other valley visitors, and headed toward the central hall. Morgan had summoned the council to discuss Redwood's aggression, and although she had not received a direct invitation, she felt compelled to be present. She was, after all, the Alpha's mate now, even if Morgan refused to see her as an equal partner. Upon entering the hall, she found Morgan, Saurin, Galen, and other senior council members huddled around a long table layered with maps. The maps showed boundary lines, skirmish sites, and supply routes. Several counselors whispered among themselves, tension radiating from every stiff shoulder and furrowed brow. Morgan leaned over the table, hands braced on its edges. He spoke in a low, intense voice that carried an edge of suppressed anger. "They think we're weak because Redwood managed to breach our gates on the day of the ceremony," Morgan was saying. We must retaliate swiftly, or they will continue to test us. Elodie hovered at the periphery, unsure if she was truly welcome in this circle. She waited until there was a slight lull in the conversation, then approached. Saurin glanced up, catching sight of her first. Something akin to compassion flashed in his eyes, but he said nothing. Morgan, noticing the direction of Saurin's gaze, followed it to see Elodie standing there. A flicker of annoyance furrowed Morgan's brow. "This is a council meeting," he stated, as though that were explanation enough to keep her away. Elodie squared her shoulders. "I know," she replied quietly, "but I am your mate now, and Redwood's aggression affects me as well. I want to help." A few council members shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at Morgan to gauge his reaction. Finally, he exhaled and made a terse gesture that she could remain. "Very well, but keep silent unless you have something necessary to add." Though not exactly an enthusiastic welcome, it was more than she expected. Elodie stepped closer, bracing herself for the grim reality that was sure to dominate the discussion. One of the council members, an older woman named Isla, tapped a spot on the map. "Their main force appears to be massed near the eastern approach, but Redwood is cunning. They may have scouts circling to the north. We risk thinning our resources if we concentrate solely on the east." Galen interjected. "We can't afford a direct confrontation on multiple fronts. Our best strategy might be to reach out to neutral packs for reinforcements, but that takes time." Morgan's gaze burned with frustration. "Time is something Redwood is taking from us. They strike at our borders, injure our guards, and threaten civilians. If we do not push back soon, they'll sense we lack resolve." Saurin, standing at Morgan's right, spoke quietly. "We cannot plunge headlong into Redwood's territory without a clear plan. If Redwood's Alpha has set a trap, we risk losses we can't sustain." Morgan's lip twitched with impatience. "You would have me wait, then?" he snapped. "No," Saurin answered steadily. "But we must choose our ground carefully, draw them to a place of our advantage, not theirs." The discussion continued, each council member offering opinions, concerns, and possible maneuvers. Elodie listened closely, absorbing the complexity of the situation. Redwood had always been a larger pack with a history of expansionist tendencies, and while Silver Mountain held its territory by virtue of well-organized defenses, Redwood's aggression seemed fueled by new Kaya. Leadership determined to test those defenses. Eventually, when there was a brief pause, Elodie spoke up, her tone measured. "Redwood's Alpha, do we know if they have personal vendettas or motivations beyond territory? Could the timing of this attack be related to our ceremony, a statement against alliances they dislike?" Morgan cast her a sidelong glance. "We have conflicting rumors. Some say Redwood's Alpha was humiliated in a prior negotiation with my father. Others say he seeks to prove his dominance among the neighboring packs. Either way, Redwood wants to expand, or at least show they are not to be trifled with." Elodie glanced down at the map. "What about a message of truce or negotiation?" she asked softly, though she half expected the council to dismiss the idea. If Redwood's Alpha is trying to display strength, maybe a chance to talk could diffuse some tension. At least, it might buy time for us to fortify other areas. Several council members made derisive noises, but Saurin looked thoughtful. "She has a point," he murmured, tapping the table with a finger. "Redwood might simply be waiting for us to appear weak, but if we offer parlay, it could give us a clearer sense of Redwood's true plans. And we'd maintain control over the meeting's conditions." Morgan scoffed lightly. "You think Redwood's Alpha will bother with a peaceful parlay when he's already spilled blood on our doorstep? Sometimes, showing willingness to talk can catch an aggressor off guard," Saurin returned. "He might reveal more of his intentions." Isla placed her palms on the table. A parlay is a gamble. We risk Redwood using the meeting as an ambush or a ruse. But if we go on the offensive without trying diplomacy, Galen added, we might start a full-scale war neither side truly wants. Morgan's gray eyes flickered around the group, resting on Elodie for a fraction of a second. Fine, he said at last. We'll send a messenger to Redwood's Alpha, summoning him to a parlay at the clearing near the old border stones. If he refuses or tries anything, we'll know his intentions clearly. Though reluctant, Morgan gave the order, and the council disbanded to carry out various tasks, setting up watch posts, preparing a scouting party, and gathering resources. As the others left the table, Elodie lingered, feeling the need to speak with Morgan, even if she expected him to brush her off. When they were alone, she mustered her courage. Morgan, I wanted to say. He turned abruptly, impatience etched in the rigid lines of his jaw. We can't speak now. I have patrols to arrange. She swallowed, her chest tightening. I just wanted to acknowledge that I didn't mean to disobey you when I went to help the wounded. I know, Morgan cut her off curtly. You were trying to be useful. But you're the Alpha's mate now, which makes you a target. You risked your safety and the pack's morale if Redwood had gotten to you. But you can't expect me to hide behind locked doors, she argued, a slight tremor in her voice. I want to contribute, not just be a symbol or an obligation. I have knowledge that can help. Morgan sighed sharply, closing his eyes for a moment as if trying to rein in his temper. When he opened them again, they glinted with frustration. I have no time for a debate about your role. My first duty is to keep everyone safe, including you. We'll discuss this another time. He strode away, leaving her standing amidst the scattered maps, her unspoken words lodged in her throat. If she had expected any warmth or understanding, she was sorely disappointed. She was an ally in name, but in Morgan's eyes, she sensed she was yet another responsibility he had no space for. She closed her eyes, working to calm the embers of anger igniting within her. He refused to see her as anything other than a burden. Duty, always duty, overshadowing everything else. With a quiet exhalation, she turned to leave, stepping into the corridor where Saurin was waiting in hushed conversation with a sentinel. Upon seeing Elodie's upset expression, he politely dismissed the guard and gave her his full attention. Did you speak with Morgan? He asked gently. She nodded, trying to swallow the lump of frustration in her throat. He's not interested in talking to me right now. Sympathy flickered in Saurin's eyes. He's under strain, he said, though there was a weary note to his voice that suggested he too felt the weight of Morgan's stubbornness. The Redwood threat is pressing on all sides. The Alpha believes in controlling every variable. He has trouble trusting people to act without direct orders. Saurin hesitated, lowering his gaze momentarily before looking at her again. Still, I'm sorry. You deserve better than being dismissed. Emotion pulsed through her. She had no right to feel comforted by another man, least of all her husband's beta, and yet his words felt like a balm on a raw wound. She found herself leaning slightly toward him, searching for any shred of understanding. Thank you, she whispered. But it's not your fault. He cleared his throat, his posture rigid, as though forcibly reminding himself to keep a respectful distance. I'll be accompanying Morgan to the parlay if Redwood's Alpha agrees to it. In the meantime, we're strengthening the defensive lines. If Redwood strikes again, we'll lead every trained wolf on alert. His gaze slipped downward to her hands, which were clasped in front of her. And if you truly want to help, there is something you can do. Oren mentioned we have a shortage of certain medical supplies. If Redwood keeps harassing us, we could see more wounded. Perhaps you and Orin can gather the necessary herbs from the foothills or the forest's edge. Elodie perked up at the suggestion, even though the mention of Redwood's continued hostility weighed heavy on her heart. I can do that. We have some knowledge of similar herbs from the valley. As long as I have a small guard contingent, I won't be helpless. Saurin gave a single nod, relief ghosting across his face. Good. Speak with Orin. He'll know what we need most. I'll send 2 guards to accompany you. He paused, his scar catching the dim torchlight as he tilted his head. Be cautious. Redwood might have scouts in the woods, and they won't hesitate to capture or kill a vulnerable group. Elodie's stomach nodded at the thought, but she squared her shoulders. I'll be careful. Within the hour, Elodie found Orin in the healing center, performing a final check on the wounded from the previous battle. The slender young healer brightened upon hearing that Elodie wanted to help gather supplies. I've been worrying about our diminishing stock, he admitted, rummaging through clay jars and baskets. We need comfrey for broken bones, goldenrod for cuts, and if we can find any mountain thyme, that helps with infection. He compiled a list, then found a pouch large enough to store bundles of fresh herbs. Before long, Elodie was ready. True to his word, Saurin assigned 2 guards to escort her. One was the sentinel she recognized from the previous day, a tall, solemn-faced woman named Riel. And the other was a young man named Dareth, who seemed eager to prove himself. They left the compound through a small gate near the stables to avoid drawing attention. Fog still clung to the ground as they followed a narrow trail that wound along the foothills. The crisp forest air seemed almost tranquil compared to the tension behind the walls, though Elodie remained on edge, scanning the shadows between trees for any sign of hostile movement. Riel guided them to a small clearing dotted with wild plants. We often find comfrey here, she explained, pointing to a cluster of broad leaves near a fallen log. Keep your eyes open. We shouldn't linger too long. Elodie crouched among the foliage, carefully inspecting leaves and roots. Orin had explained how to identify comfrey by the shape of its leaves and the purple tinge at the base. She snipped a few stems, placing them into the pouch. Meanwhile, Riel stood guard, eyes flicking about warily, while Dareth kept to the edge of the clearing, scanning the tree line. They continued deeper, searching for goldenrod and thyme. A hush fell over them, broken only by birdsong and the crunch of leaves underfoot. Elodie felt oddly calm in this task, despite her ever-present worry about Redwood. Gathering plants offered a sense of purpose that resonated with the part of her that wanted to do more than just remain out of sight. At one point, Dareth signaled that he spotted thyme growing near a mossy rock outcropping. Elodie knelt there, gingerly harvesting sprigs of the tiny, fragrant leaves. She breathed in the earthy scent, remembering how her grandmother taught her that thyme symbolized courage. Perhaps this was a sign, a small token that she could carry with her in the days to come. Suddenly, Riel let out a sharp hiss. "Get down," she ordered in a whisper. Elodie froze, pressing herself against the rocks, her heart thrumming. Dareth hurried to crouch behind a thick pine trunk. Through the branches, Elodie glimpsed movement, dark shapes flitting between the trees. Her pulse hammered. Redwood scouts, or just passing hunters? Riel crept closer, one hand resting on the hilt of her short blade. She peered around a cluster of ferns. After a tense moment, she turned back to Elodie, whispering, "At least 3 redwood wolves in human form, coming this way. They're not wearing open insignia, but their scent is unmistakable. Stay low." Elodie's breath came in short, shallow bursts, fear and adrenaline mixing in her veins. She clutched the pouch of thyme, feeling the leaves tremble within her grasp. Riel motioned for Dareth to circle around. He nodded, sliding silently into the undergrowth. The Redwood scouts drew closer, their hushed voices carrying in the still air. Elodie caught snatches of conversation, references to perimeter lines, mention of the Alpha's next move. One voice sounded frustrated. "We can't just wait here while Silver Mountain regroups." The Alpha demanded results. "We need to find a weakness in their defenses." Another retorted, "We can't risk an open fight in broad daylight. We wait for the signal." Riel's eyes narrowed. She motioned for Elodie to stay put, then carefully inched forward. Elodie watched with held breath, mind racing. If Redwood scouts found them, the results could be fatal. She berated herself for venturing out, though the knowledge that the pack needed these supplies had spurred her on. Suddenly, one of the Redwood scouts paused, sniffing the air. "Someone's here," he muttered, turning toward the clearing. Riel ducked behind a fallen log, pressing herself flat. Elodie crouched even lower, praying their scents remained hidden by the myriad forest aromas. Dareth, somewhere in the undergrowth, would be ready to defend them, but he was only one guard. Anxiety churned in Elodie's stomach. A tense silence hung in the air. The Redwood scouts circled, scanning the area, but apparently they did not detect Riel or Elodie's exact location. After what felt like an eternity, they continued on, slipping between the pines with stealthy footsteps. Riel let out a quiet sigh of relief, beckoning for Elodie to join her. Soon Dareth reappeared from the shadows, confirming that the Redwood scouts had moved on. "They're heading west, probably deeper into our territory. We should return immediately," he whispered urgently. Elodie nodded, heart still pounding. The threat was too near, the forest too compromised. Though they had gathered some herbs, it was not worth risking capture or leading Redwood directly to the healing center. Stifling her frustration, she fell into step behind Riel as they retraced their path out of the foothills. The knowledge that Redwood had scouts actively moving this close to the compound shook her deeply. Even beyond the walls, there was no escape from Redwood's aggression. They made it back without incident, and Elodie wasted no time delivering the freshly gathered herbs to the healing center. Orin's eyes lit with relief when he saw the comfrey in time. "This will help us treat lingering wounds." "Thank you," he said, voice thick with gratitude. "We might have enough for a few days, if Redwood attacks again." Elodie forced a tight smile. "Let's hope we won't need it." Morgan sent a parlay request. Orin ran a hand through his hair. "I pray Redwood's Alpha accepts. Our pack has lost too much already." Throughout the afternoon, Elodie checked on her mother, then assisted in grinding herbs into ointments. All the while, her mind buzzed with questions. Would Redwood agree to meet for peace talks, or was another raid inevitable? Would Morgan's leadership prove enough to defend this territory without descending into endless bloodshed? By evening, word came from a scout returning from Redwood's encampment. Redwood's Alpha had replied. He would meet Morgan at the old border stones in 2 days, apparently curious about what Silver Mountain might offer. The prospect of a truce or negotiation ignited faint hope across the pack, yet caution tempered their optimism. Any meeting with Redwood's Alpha was fraught with risk. Morgan immediately prepared to depart for the parlay with a small contingent. Saurin, of course, would accompany him. The tension in the compound was almost palpable as they readied themselves. Elodie found herself pacing the edges of the courtyard, watching as the group prepared their horses. She was torn. A portion of her wanted to accompany them, to stand at Morgan's side, to prove she was more than a decorative mate. Yet she also recognized that Redwood would be all too eager to leverage her presence if they discovered any potential vulnerability. She looked for Morgan, hoping for a quick word before he left. He was speaking with Galen near the stables, outlining what defensive measures should remain in place. Saurin was adjusting the saddle on his horse, occasionally glancing up at Morgan's conversation. Elodie approached, clearing her throat softly. Morgan acknowledged her with a brief incline of his head. "We depart at dawn," he stated, not waiting for her to speak. "You remain here, under guard. Redwood cannot be trusted, and I won't risk them taking you hostage as leverage." She nodded, though frustration flared. She could already anticipate the isolation that awaited her. "I understand," she said quietly. "But if things go wrong, if Redwood moves against you, I'll handle it." Morgan cut in, his tone final. Then, as if softening slightly, he added, "Focus on your own safety. That's all I ask." With that, he turned his attention back to Galen. Elodie stood there, feelings of insignificance creeping over her. She was supposed to be his mate. Did he even see her as a partner, or just another responsibility to keep behind a fortified wall? A gentle voice at her shoulder made her turn. Saurin had approached, leading his horse by the reins. "If Redwood's alpha truly intends to talk, we may return quickly," he said, not unkindly. "But if something happens, let the council know your advice is worth hearing. They might listen." Her eyes flipped to the scar on his cheek, then back to his steady gaze. "That might be wishful thinking," she murmured. "But thank you for believing I can help." He gave a slight nod, silence stretching between them. Then he sighed, as if weighed down by thoughts left unspoken. "Take care, Elodie," he said at last. "We'll do our best to come back with good news." Early the next morning, Elodie watched from the courtyard gate as Morgan, Saurin, and a small group of warriors rode off into the gray twilight, disappearing into the forest that separated Silver Mountain's domain from Redwood's. Her mother stood beside her, anxious. Neither spoke, but they both knew how precarious the situation was. Redwood could easily set a trap. Or, if Redwood's alpha was willing to negotiate, perhaps a tenuous peace could be forged. The hours crawled by. Elodie occupied herself with chores around the compound, restless energy coursing through her. She made repeated rounds to the healing center, the storerooms, the kitchens, anywhere that might need an extra pair of hands. All around, people carried out their tasks, fear gnawing at them, eyes often straying to the perimeter, as though expecting Redwood's forces to storm the gates at any moment. Dusk descended, and there was no sign of Morgan's party. Elodie dined quietly with her mother in a corner of the Nauspass communal hall, appetite dulled by the worry gnawing at her core. That night, she slept fitfully, plagued by dreams of wild wolves howling in shadows, Redwood and Silver Mountain locked in a deadly embrace. By the next morning, tension rippled through the pack, like a taut bowstring. Still no word from Morgan. Elodie stood on one of the walls overlooking the forest, scanning the horizon in vain. She sensed a mounting dread, a fear that Redwood had betrayed them at the parlay. Surely, even if the negotiation was lengthy, someone would have returned by now with a message. It was nearing midday when a scout raced through the gate, panting and sweat-soaked. The entire courtyard turned to stare. Elodie rushed down from the wall, intercepting him just as he nearly collapsed. One of the guards supported him, and Elodie pushed back the crowd forming around them. "Speak," she urged gently, heart in her throat. "What have you seen?" The scout gulped for air, his eyes wide with panic. "Trickery Redwood's alpha ambushed them," he gasped. "Morgan is badly wounded. Saurin managed to lead a retreat, but Redwood's warriors are pursuing. They'll be here soon, or they might keep attacking in the open." He broke off, sliding into unconsciousness. Elodie's mind reeled. Morgan was wounded. Redwood was in pursuit. She whirled to face the guards. We need to send out reinforcements at once. Someone must help them. The guards hesitated, uncertain. One reason that Redwood might have a larger force waiting to exploit any rescue attempt. Another insisted they focus on defending the compound. Elodie's blood pounded in her ears. She could practically see Morgan and Saurin struggling to bring the battered group back, Redwood wolves hot on their heels. Ignoring the guard's warnings, she grabbed the nearest sentinel's arm. "Give me a horse. I'll gather healers. We'll meet them halfway." His eyes widened in protest. "That's too risky, my lady. Redwood scouts, would you have your alpha die on the road?" She snapped, surprising even herself with the steel in her voice. "I'm the alpha's mate. Let me do this." The sentinel, flustered, looked to Galen, who had arrived on the scene. The elder's face was grim. After a short, tense pause, he said, "We'll organize a small rescue party. Elodie will lead Orin and 2 or 3 others with medical skill. We cannot leave our alpha to bleed out in Redwood territory." Within minutes, Elodie found herself saddling a horse. Her mother watched with tears in her eyes, but she did not stop her daughter. Orin joined her, along with Riel and 2 more guards. The gates opened, and they galloped into the forest. Despite the gravity of the situation, Elodie felt an odd sense of purpose surging in her veins. Morgan needed help. Redwood threatened them all, and she could do something real, something tangible, to save lives. They rode hard, the horses' hooves pounding the leaf-strewn ground. The crisp air stung her cheeks, and she gripped the reins with determination. A few miles from the compound, they spotted the first signs of a struggle. Trampled ferns, fresh blood splattered on a tree trunk. They followed the trail, scanning the forest for redwood ambushers. Riel led the way, crossbow at the ready, tension etched in every line of her body. At last they heard the sound of voices, gasps of pain, the sharp snap of branches. Emerging into a small clearing, Elodie found Morgan's group. 2 of his warriors lay on the ground, one unconscious. Another pressed a blood-soaked rag against Morgan's side. Saurin stood over them, scanning the perimeter, his tunic stained with dirt and gore. Relief flashed in his eyes when he saw Elodie and the rescue party. "Over here," he called hoarsely. "Morgan's losing blood." Elodie dismounted, heart lurching at the sight of Morgan's pallid face and the angry slash across his torso. She rushed to his side, dropping to her knees in the damp leaves. Orin followed, rummaging through his satchel for bandages and salves. The other guards formed a protective circle, alert for Redwood's presence. Morgan's eyes fluttered open as Elodie pressed her hand gently to his forehead. He blinked, struggling to focus. His breath came in ragged pants, each movement sending tremors of pain through him. "What are you doing here?" he managed to rasp. "Helping you," Elodie murmured, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear twisting her insides. She tore strips of bandage as Orin poured a disinfecting tincture over the wound. Morgan hissed, teeth bared. Saurin crouched nearby, crossbow still in his grip, scanning the forest. "We have to move soon," he said. "Redwood scouts can't be far behind. They ambushed us at the border stones, and we barely escaped." Elodie worked with Orin quickly, packing the wound with herbs to staunch the bleeding, then wrapping the bandages around Morgan's torso. He grimaced, but the makeshift treatment slowed the flow of blood. Orin administered a mild, pain-relieving tincture. At the same time, Elodie observed that one of the other warriors was also badly wounded. She beckoned Riel, who helped shift the warrior to a more stable position so Orin could treat him too. Morgan's breath eased somewhat. He clutched Elodie's hand, his eyes briefly meeting hers with something akin to gratitude or shock. "You came for me," he whispered. She forced a shaky smile. "I won't let Redwood take you from us." In that moment, a rustle in the undergrowth made them all freeze. Saurin aimed his crossbow, Riel raised a blade, and tension coiled like a spring. Out of the tree line stepped 3 redwood wolves in human form, bristling with hostility. Their leader, a tall figure with dark hair tied in braids, sneered at the battered Silver Mountain group. "Look at you," the redwood scout taunted, stepping forward. "Wounded Alpha, ragged Beta. Surrender now, and maybe we'll let you live." Elodie's heart pounded. Morgan struggled to sit up, but his face contorted with pain. Saurin steadied him with one arm, crossbow unwavering in the other. "We will never surrender," Saurin growled. "Not after your ambush." Riel and the remaining guards tensed, weapons ready, but Redwood outnumbered them if more scouts lurked behind the trees. Elodie feared a second brutal fight in which Morgan might lose more blood, or the entire group might be slaughtered. She glanced at Saurin, at Morgan's labored breathing, at Redwood's menacing stance. Then a sudden wave of defiance rose within her. She rose to her feet and strode a few paces forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. "We're only here to retrieve our wounded," she said, voice surprisingly steady. "Morgan can't fight you. You've already dealt a grievous blow. Let us leave in peace." The redwood scout spat on the ground. "Why should we grant mercy? Once he recovers, he'll come for us again." Elodie inhaled sharply. "Your Alpha agreed to a parlay. He broke that promise. If you kill Morgan now, you'll spark a war that will rage for generations. Is that what Redwood wants?" The scout hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Our Alpha wants to prove that Redwood is the strongest." "Then prove it by allowing a wounded Alpha to leave," she countered, stepping even closer, though her heart thudded in terror. "A truly mighty pack does not fear letting an injured enemy go. Let Morgan see Redwood's mercy, so that if negotiations are attempted again, Redwood's word might carry meaning." A tense silence stretched. The redwood scout shifted uncertainly, glancing back at his companions. By the flicker in their eyes, Elodie realized they had not expected a resolute confrontation from someone who was not a warrior. Her words had pricked at their pride in a way they could not easily dismiss. "At last," the scout scoffed. "Fine," he snarled. "We'll let you limp away this time, but don't expect Redwood's Alpha to show kindness again." He turned on his heel, gesturing for his comrades to follow. As they melted back into the forest, Elodie nearly sagged with relief. Saurin exhaled slowly, tension radiating from his every muscle. "That was risky," he muttered. But it worked. Morgan's eyes were half-lidded with pain, but he gazed at Elodie, something new and unspoken in his expression. Before he could say anything, Oren urged them to hoist Morgan onto a makeshift litter. Using 2 horses, they rigged a support to carry him and the other severely wounded warrior back to the compound. The journey was excruciatingly slow, and Redwood's presence remained a lurking threat, but they encountered no more scouts. By dusk, they stumbled through the gates, battered but alive. Galen and several others rushed forward, aiding in carrying Morgan to the healing center. Elodie followed close behind, her limbs trembling with exhaustion, but her mind fixed on ensuring Morgan survived. In the quiet lamplight, Oren and the healers tended Morgan's wound more thoroughly. They used stronger salves, stitched the gash closed, and bound his torso firmly. Morgan drifted in and out of consciousness, hissing in pain when the stitching tugged at sensitive flesh. Elodie stayed near him, holding a basin of water, handing Orin supplies as needed. Hours later, Orin nodded in satisfaction. "He will recover," he told Elodie. "He needs rest, minimal movement, and watchful care for fever. But the wound isn't fatal now that we've closed it." Relief buckled Elodie's knees. She sank onto a stool, tears burning her eyes. Morgan was safe, albeit gravely weakened. Saurin, who had assisted in moving Morgan, hovered by the doorway. He met Elodie's gaze, relief mingling with a silent admiration. She felt a pang in her chest, acknowledging the undeniable bond forming with this beta who stood as the fortress Morgan refused to be. Eventually, Morgan stirred, his features contorted in discomfort. He focused on Elodie, who leaned over him. You saved me," he rasped, wincing at the effort of speaking. "I owe you more than I can say." She pressed a careful hand to his forehead, feeling his feverish warmth. "You owe me nothing. We are bound, remember?" Her voice caught, emotion welling up. "Just rest and heal." His eyelids fluttered, and a faint, humorless chuckle escaped his lips. "I was wrong about you," he managed. "I see that now." Then he closed his eyes, drifting back into unconsciousness. Elodie sat there, wrestling with her tumult of feelings. Morgan was alive, thanks in part to her risky rescue. But Redwood's threat had not abated. War lingered on the horizon, and it was anyone's guess how the precarious balance of power would shift. In the following days, Morgan hovered in the liminal space between fever and recovery. Elodie scarcely left his side, determined to nurse him with the knowledge her grandmother had imparted. She helped Orin change bandages, administer herbs to keep infection at bay, and cool Morgan's brow with damp cloths whenever his temperature spiked. Gradually, color returned to his cheeks, and the tight lines of pain around his eyes eased. In his more lucid moments, Morgan thanked her in halting words, almost unsure how to bridge the distance he had enforced for so long. Yet for all his gratitude, Elodie sensed that a profound chasm remained between them. He respected her, perhaps even admired her capability under duress, but the bond of hearts was still missing. She yearned for deeper connection. But Morgan's personality was like the granite of the mountains, unyielding, guarded. Meanwhile, Saurin coordinated the pack's defenses. He took charge with the calm efficiency Elodie had come to associate with him. Every day, he checked in on Morgan's progress, typically staying only a moment or two, but always with a quiet word for Elodie as well. It was in those brief intervals, a shared glance, a murmured question about her welfare, that Elodie felt a forbidden comfort creeping into her heart. Saurin was the one who truly seemed to see her as more than an accessory or a resource. Weeks passed. Morgan's wound mended enough for him to leave the healing center, though he still moved gingerly, a reminder that Redwood's strike had nearly ended his life. Under Saurin's guidance, the pack resumed daily routines, though the specter of Redwood's next move never faded. The Redwood Alpha had shown his willingness to break parlay, and thus no new negotiations arose. A tense stalemate settled over the region. During Morgan's convalescence, he gradually allowed Elodie to take on more responsibilities. At first, it was out of necessity. He physically could not manage every task. But over time, he saw her competence. She handled record-keeping, oversaw supply checks, and supported Orin's healing efforts. The council members noticed, some remarking that she was the most involved Alpha's mate they had seen in a generation. Yet, in the privacy of their quarters, once Morgan was able to return there, an awkwardness lingered. He slept fitfully, still grappling with pain, and they rarely spoke of personal matters. They were polite, almost cordial, but there was no true intimacy. A part of Elodie's spirit withered at that distance, leaving her hungering for an emotional connection she suspected would never come. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Elodie stood in the courtyard, contemplating her role in this pack. She glanced toward the training yard, where Saurin was overseeing a sparring session, his scar catching the last rays of light. She recognized how her heart fluttered at the sight of him, guilt chasing close behind. She was Morgan's mate. What business did she have feeling drawn to the beta? She tried to swallow those feelings, convincing herself it was mere admiration for Saurin's sense of calm, or a desire to find in him the warmth Morgan could not give. But day by day, those excuses rang hollow. She saw in Saurin an understanding that resonated on a level she could not ignore. And in fleeting moments, like when he handed her a stack of ledgers in the corridor, or when he showed her how to adjust supply records, she felt an electric tension between them, unspoken yet undeniable. It was only a matter of time before fate tested that tension, forcing them all to confront truths that hovered unspoken in the corners of the pack's stronghold. Morgan's partial recovery brought no respite from Redwood's looming menace. Scouts regularly reported Redwood's ongoing movements, small raids on outlying farmland, and threats of a larger offensive come spring. Council discussions turned grim. Redwood's alpha was more determined than ever to break Silver Mountain's will. Unless Morgan could unify his pack and lead them with renewed strength, Redwood would grind them down through relentless attrition. One evening, as Elodie assisted Orin in finalizing the day's healing inventory, Saurin entered the center, his face set with quiet resolve. "We've received word," he said, "that Redwood might strike the valley next, the place where your parents live. Morgan wants to send a contingent to protect them. Will you go, to guide our warriors? You know the terrain better than Retter. Anyone else here?" Elodie's heart leapt with concern for her home pack. "Of course," she breathed. "But what does Morgan say about me leaving the fortress?" Saurin's dark eyes flickered. "He trusts my judgment on this matter. And, with Redwood's threats so close, we need you. You alone can negotiate safe passage with your old neighbors. Show them we come in peace, and rally them to help if Redwood tries to push Grass into the valley." She nodded, her pulse quickening. This was a chance to protect her family, but also to serve the pack in a tangible way. "I'll do it." By dawn, Elodie and a small company, including Saurin, departed Silver Mountain. Morgan remained behind. He was still not fully recovered and had to oversee defenses. As they rode south toward the valley, Elodie felt an odd mixture of excitement and anxiety swirling in her chest. She thought of her mother and father, who had last seen her on the day she left for the ceremonial union. What would they think, seeing her again in the company of armed wolves? The journey took the better part of a day, with Saurin leading the defensive formation. Elodie rode near the front, her mind racing. Night was already wrapping its dark arms around the countryside when they finally reached the outskirts of her childhood home. The sight of the familiar farmland, rolling gently under the moonlight, tugged at her emotions. Memories of simpler times flooded back, quiet mornings gathering eggs, the scent of harvest, her father's stories by the hearth. They dismounted at the edge of the main settlement. Lantern lights glimmered from a cluster of houses. Alerted by the sound of horses, a few villagers emerged cautiously. Recognizing Elodie, they broke into low murmurs. She approached them, speaking in a reassuring tone, explaining that Redwood might soon harass their farmland, and the Silver Mountain pack had come to offer protection. Her father appeared at the door of the family home, his eyes going wide at the sight of her. "Elodie," he murmured, voice trembling with both relief and astonishment. "We didn't expect to see you, is everything." She hurried forward and embraced him, tears stinging her eyes. "Father," Redwood poses a threat to the valley. "We've come to fortify your defenses." I wish it wasn't necessary, but we must be prepared." Her mother joined them, face lined with worry and joy in equal measure. They ushered Elodie and Saurin inside, the humble wooden walls a stark contrast to Silver Mountain's grand fortress. Over a hastily prepared meal, they discussed Redwood's encroachments. Several local men joined the conversation, all determined to defend the valley but uncertain how to coordinate with werewolves from the mountains. Saurin, taking an unassuming seat near the hearth, laid out a plan. Patrolling the perimeter, setting up signal fires, and maintaining an escape route should Redwood's forces prove overwhelming. Elodie felt pride stir within her as she watched him speak. His clarity, his calm authority, the way the villagers began to nod, trusting him despite his formidable presence. If Morgan was the raging storm, Saurin was the steady foundation. A pang jolted her as she realized how deeply she relied on his steadiness. Night deepened. Plans set. The valley folk spread word among their neighbors, and a small watch was organized. Elodie decided to stay with her parents for the evening, to reassure them. Though she spent half the night in anxious conversations with villagers, Saurin and his warriors set up a temporary camp outside the village center, rotating patrols. In the dim pre-dawn hours, Elodie found herself on the porch of her parents' home, the wooden boards creaking beneath her feet. She stared at the night sky, inhaling the scent of Doolittle crops. A sense of unreality tugged at her. She had left this place to become Morgan's mate, yet here she was again, older, wiser, burdened by responsibility, and accompanied by the beta who felt like a more genuine ally than ally. Her own husband. Footsteps approached softly. She turned to see Saurin, his silhouette cutting a quietly powerful figure in the moonlight. He stopped a few paces away. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice barely above a murmur. She shook her head. "Too many worries. My parents, Redwood, Morgan, everything." He nodded, gazing across the farmland. Silence stretched for a few beats, until at last he sighed. "When you first arrived at Silver Mountain, I never expected you would have to shoulder so much, but you've proven yourself capable, time and again. The pack has begun to trust you. Even Morgan sees it." She folded her arms, sadness creeping into her voice. "It's not enough to earn respect. I don't know what to do with the empty space in my marriage. We function as two people who share duties, but not hearts." He hesitated, tension shading his dark gaze. "Morgan is complicated. His mind has always been on protecting the pack. I doubt he ever learned how to let someone in." He paused, as though carefully weighing his next words. "But you deserve more. I see how much you give, how you risked everything to save him, and how lonely you remain." Emotion clawed at her throat. The night air felt charged, every quiet breath magnified. She took a small step closer, searching his face, the glint of his scar in the moonlight. "You're the only one who truly understands," she whispered. She swallowed the rest of her sentence, uncertain what she was about to confess, but sure it was a truth neither of them were ready to fully voice. Saurin closed his eyes for a moment, as though fighting an internal battle. When he opened them again, they burned with an intensity that took her breath away. He lifted a hand slightly, as if to reach for her, but then he stopped, dropping it back to his side. "We have a duty to the Alpha, to the pack," he said quietly, anguish flickering in his tone. "I am bound by oath to serve him, and you are bound by a vow as his mate. Tears threatened to spill from Elodie's eyes. She nodded, knowing the truth of those words. Yet the gravitational pull between them felt undeniable. Part of her wanted to close the distance and let the pain be washed away by a comfort she suspected only Saurin could provide. But fear and guilt held her back. A moment longer they stood there, suspended in the hush of night, hearts pounding with unspoken longing. Finally, Saurin let out an unsteady breath. "We should rest," he murmured, turning away. "At dawn, we resume patrols. Redwood might strike at any hour," she managed to whisper. "Good night," her voice trembling. Then he was gone, disappearing into the gloom, leaving her standing in the silent porch light with a storm of emotion raging inside. What followed over the next week was a tense vigil. The valley's newly formed watch, supplemented by Saurin's warriors, kept Redwood at bay. Scouts occasionally spotted redwood wolves circling the outskirts, but never in overwhelming numbers. Meanwhile, Morgan's condition improved back at Silver Mountain, though he remained physically weakened. Elodie spent her days working alongside Saurin to teach the villagers rudimentary defense tactics, set up warning signals, and arrange supply runs. In the quiet hours, stolen glances passed between them like secret confessions neither dared articulate. She believed he felt it too, the slow burn of attachment forged in trials, yet they both wore the masks of duty. At night, she sometimes dreamt of living a life free from constraints, a world where the vow binding her to Morgan did not exist, and she could walk into Saurin's arms without shame. Each morning, she awoke to the cruel reminder of reality. At last, a message arrived from Morgan, brought by a swift rider. Redwood's aggression had cooled near the mountain, as though Redwood realized their advantage had ebbed with Morgan's partial recovery. More importantly, Redwood's alpha had encountered another pack boundary that refused them entry, forcing Redwood to divert resources. The immediate crisis seemed to wane. Morgan ordered Saurin to return to Silver Mountain with Elodie, leaving a small team behind to continue assisting the valley. Farewells were exchanged, tears shed, but the valley folk were grateful for Elodie's efforts to safeguard them. Her father hugged her fiercely, pride mingling with lingering worry in his eyes. They both knew Redwood could resurface at any time, but for the moment, the danger receded. Thus, Elodie and Saurin led the returning group back to Silver Mountain. The journey felt subdued. They had succeeded in defending the valley without direct conflict, yet the tension between them lingered, unspoken. At each stop along the road, they kept a respectful distance, never risking a moment alone. When they re-entered the compound gates, Elodie was struck by how quickly it felt like stepping into another life. The once bustling courtyard was quieter now, many wolves absent on patrol. Morgan, hearing of their return, emerged slowly from the main hall, leaning slightly on a carved cane, a residual effect of his injury. He offered a faint smile. "Elodie," he greeted, voice still rough from convalescence. "You did well. The valley is safe, and Redwood did not advance." "Aye, thank you." She glanced at the cane, noticing how the slash across his torso had likely taken a toll he could not entirely hide. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. "Better," he replied, stepping aside to let her pass. "Come inside. We'll speak." They retired to a quiet room near the hall, the same chamber where Elodie once tried on her wedding gown. Memories flickered across her mind, feeling like they belonged to a distant life. Morgan eased into a chair, gesturing for her to take another across from him. She studied his face, the lines of pain and grudging respect etched into his features. "Galen told me how you volunteered to rescue me," Morgan began, voice subdued. Saurin told me how you stood up to Redwood scouts. You guided the defenses in your old home. You've proven you are more than just a symbolic mate." Elodie waited, unsure how to respond. He continued, glancing at his cane. "I always believed an alpha's mate should remain protected, that our enemies would exploit any perceived weakness. But you are not weak, and the pack sees that now." A flicker of sadness tugged at Elodie's heart. She wanted to hear more, an apology for his coldness, an admission that he might try to open his heart. Instead, he sighed and said, "This changes things. The council might want to grant you a formal role overseeing pack welfare. Another area, perhaps the healing center or supply chains, you would lead with me." She managed a nod, swallowing the lingering ache. "If that is what the pack needs." Morgan's expression softened, perhaps the closest he had come to genuine warmth. "I want us to find a way forward, Elodie. I know we do not share love, as some mates might, but we share responsibility to this land, to these people, and I respect you." Respect. It was not the devotion she had once hoped for, that it was a crack in the wall. She forced a small smile. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, clearly relieved to have reached some form of understanding. After a moment, he rose, wincing at the strain. "Rest tonight. We'll announce your role to the council tomorrow." She stood as well, acutely aware of how hollow the chamber felt without real warmth between them. A role in the pack was progress, yet the bond she truly yearned for was absent. And as Morgan departed, each step accompanied by the tap of his cane, she closed her eyes against tears she refused to let fall. That evening, she wandered the courtyard, mulling over the path her life had taken. She was Alpha's mate by vow, esteemed for her courage, increasingly trusted with responsibilities. Perhaps that should suffice. Perhaps time would dull her longing for a deeper connection. Yet she found her feet leading her toward the training yard, where she glimpsed Saurin finishing a late sparring session with a few guards. He dismissed them, turning to wipe sweat from his brow. Then he noticed Elodie approaching. His dark gaze rested on her, softening. "You're back in your rightful home, so to speak," he said quietly, voice echoing in the still air. She shrugged, her heart constricting. "Is it my home, go? I do my duties, but I feel like a stranger in Morgan's life." Saurin set aside the practice sword, stepping closer, tension coiling between them. "Morgan has changed his stance toward you," he pointed out. "He admires your courage, even if he cannot love you as you deserve." Elodie swallowed hard. The truth in his words stung, yet also offered an unspoken alternative. She saw the conflict in Saurin's face, the loyalty binding him to Morgan at war with the empathy binding him to her. After a long silence, she whispered, "Sometimes I wish the vow had never happened, that I could freely choose my place." Saurin's breath caught. He reached out, calloused fingers almost brushing her cheek. Then he jerked his hand back as though scalded, regret shadowing his features. "I can't be the one to lead you astray," he muttered, voice tight. "You're bound to my Alpha, and I swore an oath to serve him." A raw ache surged through Elodie, tears threatening behind her eyes. She hated the constraints that locked them in place. Duty, tradition, vow, words that shaped their destinies, though they gnawed at their hearts. But fate, ever cruel and capricious, was not finished testing them. Days turned into weeks, Redwood's presence faded to a distant threat, and the pack seemed on the mend. Morgan's mobility improved. Yet one morning, tragedy struck in the form of a fever that swept through a portion of the pack. Injuries from Redwood's raids had left some wolves susceptible to infection, which spread rapidly in the cramped quarters. Saurin and Elodie struggled to manage the outbreak, but the sickness claimed the lives of 2 older wolves within days. Morgan, still physically weakened, was confined again after a relapse, though not from the fever itself, but from the strain on his barely healed body. The pack panicked, worrying Redwood might seize the opportunity if the alpha fell ill. In this crisis, Saurin stepped up, commanding respect. Elodie found herself working side by side with him, coordinating supplies, enforcing quarantines, and ensuring the stable sections of the pack remained vigilant. She saw firsthand how the pack turned to Saurin as a de facto leader, trusting his steady approach. Many times, she witnessed pack members utter with relief, "Thank the spirits for Saurin's guidance." A fortnight passed in this grueling struggle, but at last, the fever receded. The healing center echoed with sighs of relief. Morgan began to recover from his relapse. Yet the ordeal left the pack drained, fragile. And in that vulnerability, the council recognized that not only had Elodie proven essential, but so had Saurin. Without his calm leadership, Redwood might have exploited their weakness long ago. One afternoon, Elodie was organizing leftover herbs in the healing center, swaths of lemon and jars spread on a table. Saurin entered, eyes flicking around to confirm the center was nearly empty. He shut the door gently behind him. She looked up, heart giving a small leap at his sudden presence. "How's Morgan?" she asked softly. "Better," Saurin said, stepping closer. "He was asking for you, but one of the elders is advising him to rest more. He'll be up soon, I suspect." She nodded, focusing on winding twine around a bundle of thyme. A tense pause hung, the air crackling with unspoken emotion. Finally, Saurin exhaled, setting his hands on the table's edge. "Elodie, these last weeks I've watched you exhaust yourself to save this pack, and I find myself caring for you more deeply than I should." Her fingers stilled, the herb bundle slipping from her grasp. She looked at him, tears welling unbidden. In his eyes, she saw the reflection of her own yearning, raw and undeniable. "I know," she whispered. "I feel the same. But what can we do?" He rubbed a hand over his scar, a gesture she recognized as frustration. "Morgan respects you now. The pack sees you as an exemplary mate, but he doesn't give you what you truly need, and you are." He looked away, voice hitching. "You fill every empty place in me I never realized was there, yet I can't betray my alpha." Her throat constricted. "Is it betrayal if he never truly wanted me?" Saurin closed his eyes, his stoic facade cracking. "The vow was made. We can't ignore that." She stepped around the table, drawn to him like a moth to flame. Her hand lifted to brush his cheek, feeling the roughness of his scar. He stood rigid, conflict warring in every taut muscle. For one shattering moment, they were poised on the edge of an irreversible choice. Then the door to the healing center opened, and Morgan stood there, leaning on his cane, eyes widening at the tableau before him. Elodie jerked her hand away from Saurin's face, heart slamming against her ribs. Saurin stepped back, tension coiling. Morgan's gaze flicked from Elodie to Saurin, a storm of realization darkening his features. Silence pounded like thunder. Finally, Morgan cleared his throat, eyes narrowing. "I wanted to inform you both that the council is meeting to discuss Redwood's next move," he said, voice strained. "Apparently, I find you otherwise occupied." Elodie's cheeks flamed with guilt. She tried to speak, but words tangled in her throat. Saurin straightened his shoulders, stepping forward. "It's not what it seems," he began, though his own voice wavered. Morgan's knuckles whitened on the cane's handle. "Then what is it?" he demanded, bitterness lacing his tone. "You think I haven't noticed the looks, the closeness that's grown between you?" Elodie's heart twisted. She reached out a trembling hand. "Morgan, please." He cut her off with a sharp gesture. "I know I've been distant, Elodie. I never pretended to offer you love, only safety, but you are my mate. Or did that vow mean nothing?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I tried, Morgan," she whispered. "I truly did. You never let me in." Morgan's face flickered with a mix of regret and anger, but then his posture hardened. He said hollowly. "Well, perhaps the beta can provide what I cannot." He turned and hobbled away, leaving them in tense silence. Elodie pressed her hand to her mouth, shock and heartache colliding within her. Saurin's eyes were bleak. "This is what I feared," he said quietly. "I never wanted to betray him. I never intended to desire you." Tears slipped free, rolling down her cheeks. She felt torn in two, her vow to Morgan unfulfilled, yet her heart pulled relentlessly toward Saurin. Now, everything was laid bare, the fragile balance shattered. Morgan did not speak to either of them for 2 days, devoting himself entirely to fortifying the pack's defenses. Rumors swirled that Redwood might soon launch a final push, while other councils whispered that Redwood's alpha was preoccupied by internal disputes. In the midst of such uncertainty, no one could afford for the leadership to be divided by personal strife. At last, Morgan summoned Elodie and Saurin privately in the main hall. He stood beside the hearth. Cane discarded though he still moved gingerly, he projected raw authority. Flames danced over his stern features. Elodie's stomach churned with dread. "I'm not a fool," Morgan said slowly, voice resonating in the wooden chamber. "I see that you, Elodie, have found in Saurin the empathy I never gave you. Saurin, you have guarded me since we were young, but you allowed a bond to form behind my back." Saurin stiffened. "We never crossed physical boundaries," he said tersely. "We tried to bury it." A brittle laugh escaped Morgan. "Feelings can be just as damning as actions. The vow binds Elodie to me, but if her heart is elsewhere, what is the vow worth?" Elodie trembled, tears on the brink again. "Morgan, please. I never wanted to betray you. I tried to be everything you needed. We saved your life, Saurin and I. We've protected the pack. I do care about you, but not in the way a mate should love an alpha." A muscle ticked in Morgan's jaw. He closed his eyes briefly, then turned a withering gaze on Saurin. "You care for her?" Saurin squared his shoulders, voice raw. "I do, but I pledged my life to serve you. I would never have pursued her if you had shown her care. She deserved so much more than cold dismissal, especially after all she sacrificed." Morgan's expression fractured with shame, anger, and something like reluctant acceptance. "I see that now," he admitted in a hoarse whisper. "I tried to protect the pack so fiercely I forgot to be human. The vow was never about love for me. It was about alliance, duty. But I realize Elodie is worth more than mere obligation." He inhaled deeply, controlling the tremor in his voice. "If Redwood remains a threat, I cannot lead with a divided mate bond. The pack senses the conflict. And, if I can't offer you the love you deserve, Elodie, perhaps it is best I let you go." Elodie and Saurin both stared at him, stunned. Morgan set his jaw. "There is a precedent, albeit rare. A vow can be transferred if the alpha consents, if the mate consents, and if another strong wolf is willing to accept the bond." The pack would see it as an official relinquishing, removing you from your role as the alpha's mate, but still keeping you within the pack. Tears blurred Elodie's vision. She had not known such a possibility existed. The idea felt both scandalous and like an unexpected mercy. "You would do that?" she managed. Morgan's eyes burned with unshed tears. "I owe you that much. You risked everything for me, and I failed to give you the care you deserved. The pack sees Saurin as a leader in all but title. If Redwood or any other threat comes, it's better for morale if my mate stands beside me willingly, or not at all." Saurin, breath unsteady, met Morgan's gaze. "Alpha, I would never have asked for this. But if it is the only way—" Morgan raised a hand, silencing him. "This is a one-time offer. If Elodie wishes to remain my mate in name, so be it. But if she chooses you, then I will release her from the vow. The beta will claim the bond, and you will become her mate." A hush enveloped them. Elodie's heart thundered, tears slipping free. She felt the weight of the choice: stay bound to Morgan in a respectful but loveless union, or accept the transfer to Saurin and face the scandal it would surely create, though it might be the only chance for true happiness. She gazed at Morgan, the alpha who never opened his heart, the man she had tried to rescue from Redwood and from his own isolation. Then she looked at Saurin, the quiet rock who had held her secrets and shared her burdens. Every longing, every lonely night, every moment of understanding between them coalesced into a certainty she could not deny. With a trembling voice, she whispered, "I choose Saurin." Morgan released a ragged breath, shoulders slumping as though a great weight had lifted and crushed him all at once. Saurin's eyes flared with awe, sorrow for Morgan, and a fierce undercurrent of joy. Morgan bowed his head, pressing the heel of his hand to his brow. "So be it. I will arrange the formal relinquishing. The pack will see that I am not cast aside, but that I willingly freed you from a bond I never nurtured. I ask only that you both remain loyal to Silver Mountain." Saurin stepped forward, emotion tightening his voice. "I will always serve this pack, Alpha, and I will protect her with my life." Elodie wiped her tears, stepping toward Morgan. She knelt at his side, placing a trembling hand on his. "Thank you," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You gave me freedom." He closed his eyes, nodding once, then gently withdrew his hand. "You gave me a chance to see my errors," he murmured. "We owe each other a clean future." A solemn hush lingered as the three parted ways, each weighed by regret and relief. In the days that followed, Morgan announced his decision to the council, citing irreconcilable dissonance in the bond. He invoked an ancient clause allowing him to pass the vow to his beta, with Elodie's consent. There was shock among some, whispers of scandal among others, but the pack had seen the distance between Morgan and Elodie, and they had also witnessed how Saurin and Elodie fought side by side. Over time, acceptance outgrew surprise. In a modest ceremony, attended by the council and a handful of curious onlookers, Elodie and Saurin spoke words that marked their official bond. Morgan bore witness, standing solemnly at the side. The vow was sealed by the same wooden cup once used in Elodie's forced union. This time, when Saurin and Elodie drank, tears glistened in both their eyes, and a quiet, radiant warmth filled the space between them. It was not pomp or show, it was two souls finding the place they had longed for. A hush fell, broken only by the gentle applause of the council. Morgan inclined his head respectfully, a mingling of sadness and acceptance in his expression. For the first time, Elodie saw a hint of unspoken affection in his eyes. as though only by relinquishing her could he appreciate her fully. Then he turned and left, cane tapping on the floor, leaving the new mates standing together, hands intertwined. The following weeks brought a cautious sense of peace. Redwood's aggression cooled once more, perhaps deterred by the pack's renewed unity. Morgan, unburdened, dedicated himself to strengthening external alliances. Saurin led the day-to-day operations, with Elodie at his side, forging the partnership she had always yearned for. Though they faced challenges, they weathered them together, stepping forward with hearts aligned. In the quiet hush of one evening, Elodie stood on the threshold of the living quarters that had once been Morgan's domain. Now it had been rearranged, a simpler space that she shared with Saurin. She caught sight of Saurin across the room, examining maps and supply ledgers. He glanced up, his scar catching the lamplight, and a warm smile curved his lips. She moved toward him, heart fluttering in that old familiar way. He opened his arms, and she melted into his embrace, tears of gratitude brimming in her eyes. In his steady heartbeat, she found the love that had once seemed impossible. And so, the vow that began as a distant duty to an alpha who could not truly cherish her, ended in the arms of the scarred, silent beta who did. Though the pack's challenges were not over, and Redwood might still cast its shadow across the mountains, Elodie no longer walked alone. Her bond was claimed by the one who had always stood watch in the periphery of her path, a testament that fate, though often cruel, could yet yield unexpected mercy in the end.